Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Port Phillip City Council. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of this land, the people of the Kulin Nations. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid style and is streamed via Council's webcast page and Facebook Live. Streams and recordings of Council meetings are copyrighted and cannot be altered, reproduced, or republished without the permission of Council. If we experience any technical difficulties this evening, we will adjourn the meeting for a short time to resolve the issue. I remind attendees that any member of the public addressing Council must extend due courtesy and respect to Council and the processes under which it operates, and must take direction from the Chair whenever called on to do so. Speakers must remain respectful, and statements or questions must not be defamatory, offensive, or objectionable, aimed at embarrassing a councillor or a member of Council staff, or relate to a matter outside the powers of the Council. Now, tonight we are blending an ordinary meeting and a planning meeting, so some are here tonight for planning and some are for ordinary. So it's going to be pretty lengthy, but we'll get started. Before I go any farther, with the formal proceedings of tonight's meeting, I'm delighted to formally announce that at the ordinary meeting held on 7th December, yesterday, my fellow councillors and I unanimously endorsed Chris Carroll as the City of Port Phillip's new CEO. This followed a highly competitive recruitment process during which we met with extremely strong candidates from varying backgrounds. Chris has impressed all of us during his tenure as interim CEO, and his strong leadership, fresh ideas, and a new approach to delivering on our council plan. Chris's strategic business thinking, honed from the corporate world and local government leadership roles, will help us to deliver the many projects and services our community wants and deserves. And councillors have full confidence he's the right person for the job. Congratulations, Chris, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. The first item on tonight's agenda is request to attend by electronic means. CEO, do we have any requests from councillors to participate in tonight's meeting by electronic means?
Through you, Mayor, we do have one from Councillor Baxter, who's got an unavoidable clash, and he'll be joining the meeting as soon as he can electronically.
Thank you, CEO. Councillors, I now seek a mover for the motion that Council approves the request to attend the meeting electronically received from Councillor Baxter. Councillor Martin to move. I need a seconder. Councillor Crawford, thank you. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? That's carried. Apologies is next. Councillor Catherine Copsey is an apology for tonight's meeting as she's taken an extended leave of absence from the 28th of November until further notice. Councillors, I advise that I will be overseas from the 10th of December to the 12th of January, even though that's during our normal break. During that time, Deputy Mayor Councillor Bond will be performing the duties of the Mayor as required under Section 21, subsection A of the Local Government Act 2022. Councillors, do we have any further apologies? No? Thank you. On to minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, we have no previous minutes to be confirmed at tonight's meeting. The minutes from the meeting held yesterday, 7th of December, will be confirmed at the 1st of February 2023 meeting. Now, declarations of conflict of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter being discussed at tonight's meeting? No? On to public question time and submissions. We will now hear all public questions and submissions on report items. There are about 35, 39, a lot. Normally we do 3 minutes, but we're going to have to reduce it to 2 minutes so we can actually hear fairly from everybody. But you are welcome to, if you don't want to talk, you're on the list. If you feel that your point's been made already, you're welcome to say, I'm not going to speak any longer. But otherwise, if you've been registered, I've got the ones that came in earlier and 2 with the forms. If you are here and have not registered yet, you'll need to speak to the team over here. All right? We'll take a break after this, and if it gets lengthy, I might stop in the middle. All right. I call upon Chris Zaire Submitting a question to council.
Hello, Mayor Consolo and fellow councillors. My name is Chris Zire. I'm a resident in Eastern Road in South Melbourne. Apologies for not being there in person. My question is in regard to the misuse of the Eastern Road Reserve North fenced off-leash dog park in South Melbourne. As you'll hear from my neighbour Sarah Phillipson in the next session, residents that face in or around this park are subjected to significant noise issues from the users of that space. Sadly, to mitigate this, we're forced to call Council Assist, liaise with COPS Animal Management Services, who have actually been quite amazing. And on many occasions, we've had to call the police, especially at night, which is really crazy that we're having to do so. There are signs at the park entrances which indicate that fines apply to those that misuse the park. But it's clear from the behaviour of those that use the space, many of which aren't from our council area, that this means very little. My question is, how many fines have been issued in the last 12 months, and how does this relate to the issuing of fines in other open spaces? And secondly, should residents be instead escalating their issues more formally with police if the fines are ineffective?
Thank you. I refer to Brian T, please.
Thank you, Mayor. And the question does refer to the underlying issue of safety, and Council does take the issue of community safety very seriously. It is a priority for Council. In terms of the reserve, Council's animal management team do proactively patrol the area. We do that 7 days a week to see if there are any dogs off lead. And our patrols have been timed to respond to information from the community about when there is off-lead behaviour contrary to the rules. At this stage, we have not issued any fines to park users, but we will continue our patrols, and where necessary, we will prosecute offending behaviour. In addition, in terms of the issue of signs, we will review the signs to make sure that the off-leash restrictions are clear. I can also confirm that Council will be undertaking a review of all current off-leash dog areas across the municipality, and consultation on this review will commence next week on the 12th of December, and will be on Council's Have Your Say page. And this Have Your Say page will clearly outline the consultation opportunities for the review as it progresses, and any feedback provided on the Eastern Reserve will be considered as part of that review.
Thank you. I call upon Sarah Phillipson, submitting a question to Council. Please say your name and suburb, and you have 2 minutes.
Sarah Phillipson, South Melbourne, and it's 2 minutes. Good evening, Mayor and councillors. I'm here regarding the noise from the fenced dog park at Eastern Road that my neighbour Chris referred to in South Melbourne, of which we live opposite. My neighbours and I have spoken several times at these council meetings about this park and its inappropriate location in the centre of a heritage residential area. One of the reasons why it's inappropriately located is the noise that emanates from the park. The noise is so impactful, I engaged an acoustic engineer to monitor the barking over a 7-day period in October. Money I would have much preferred to have spent on a holiday. The Noise Impact Assessment report only confirms in writing what we all know. There is excessive noise coming from the park. For the Council's information, I attached the relevant pages from the consultant's report to my question that I submitted to Council earlier today. Over the 7 days of monitoring on what was like a normal week, he concluded there were over 5,000 barks during the week, which averaged out to 715 a day. Though due to his conservative methodology, the consultant estimates there could be up to 10,000 barks in any given week. Barking occurs every day, at all times, every week, year after year. We have no days of respite and certainly no quiet days our neighbours enjoy. The volume and the quantity of the barking are in breach of all Victorian noise guidelines and protocols. We understand that Council will be conducting a comprehensive review of dog parks, and I was surprised to hear it starts next week because we were told by the end of December 23. But the residents surrounding the park cannot be subjected to another year of this level of noise, which is severely impacting our mental health and enjoyment of living in our own homes. My neighbours and I would like to know what noise measures Council are going to put in place whilst we wait for the results of the dog park review. Thank you.
Thank you. I refer to Brian T, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Unfortunately, there is limited council controls in terms of noise. The relevant clause 52 of our local laws concerns behaviour on council land, and that is limited to conduct of a person and cannot be applied to conduct of an animal. We do have, under the Domestic Animals Act, there is provision for the control of dog barking, but again, that is limited indeed to directed to the owner of a land and does not apply to council land. And so in relation to council land, there is no regulatory prohibition or legislation that directly deals with dog barking on council land. Council's animal management, what we will do and continue to do is monitor the park as much as possible and ensure that dogs are under effective control and are on a leash after 7:30 p.m. And this is often a effective way to reduce barking. In terms of the location of the Eastern Reserve and the appropriateness of that reserve being a dog, allowing 4 dogs, again, that is an issue that, as I've said to the previous speaker, we can consider as part of that review. And as I said to the previous speaker, that those submissions open on the 12th of December, and the Council's Have Your Say page will provide an opportunity for residents to have input into that review, including the appropriateness or otherwise of any locations with 4 dogs.
Thank you, Mayor.
I call upon Peter Moratis, submitting a question to Council. It's virtual.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. I have 2 questions about FOGO bins.
Sorry, real quick. Can you say your name and suburb for the record in your 2 minutes?
Yes, my name's Peter Moratis, and I'm at 1 Baker Street in St Kilda.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions in relation to FOGO bins. The first is in relation to the role that FOGO bins can play in the circular economy, and the second in relation to the financing of FOGO bins. So my first question is, which is in parts, can you let us know about the planning underway about where the valuable FOGO materials will go and be used for? Will treated materials, that's the second part of the question, will treated materials be available to residents and community groups for compost? And part C is, will the community be engaged in the co-design of plans for the use of FOGO materials? And my second question is in relation to the financing. Will Council consider a rebate to residents given the waste charge is for a full financial year, but at the halfway point, FOGO has not yet commenced across most of the municipality? Thank you.
Thank you. I refer to Lachlan Johnson.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you to Peter for his question. The FOGO and garden materials collected currently from our communal hub locations and the small trial or small service in Elwood, as well as from the FOGO service that will commence early next year, will be taken to a commercial facility in Dandenong South for processing before being sent for composting. While Council does not monitor the quality of the compost product produced, it will be monitoring FOGO contamination in curbside and communal bins, and our FOGO processor always has decontamination processes for FOGO material prior to the composting process commencing. At this stage, compost from Council's FOGO services is not proposed to be made available for the community or community gardens, but through Council's Don't Waste It waste strategy, which was updated in June this year, Council will be exploring opportunities for our FOGO materials to be reused within the City of Port Phillip. In response to the question about financing, as Peter outlined, the FOGO service will commence operation from January. This has been highly sought after by the community and is a key part of Council's Don't Waste It strategy and increasing the amount of material diverted from landfill. Whilst the service will not commence until next month, Council is required to include all rates and charges in the rates notices sent out in August this year. Council is charging the full year's fee due to the initial implementation costs such as one-off caddies and liners, bins, and noting that this is only partial cost recovery. Residents will receive their FOGO bins from approximately the 9th of January, with the FOGO service commencing towards the end of January 2023.
Thank you. The next section we're speaking about is to item 10.1, change of use to rooming house. There are 13 speakers to this. I'd like to flag that Council is aware of and wishes not to divulge further information about sensitive and private information regarding a site referenced near the one we're speaking tonight. I hope that makes it clear. I don't want to speak more about what happens at that site. So please, when you're speaking tonight, don't bring it up because it is a recorded meeting and it would be in the best interest to not talk about the neighbouring property. Okay? I call upon Richard Want, speaking to item 10.1, change to the use of rooming house. Yes, please, come up to the table. The light should be on, and that'll be the recording of the microphone. So please say your name and suburb, and you have 2 minutes.
I'll try to keep to that. My name is Richard Want. I'm in Wenden Grove, St Kilda East. No, thanks. I wouldn't have known. I can sing as well if people want me to. So did everyone here? I'm Richard Want. I'm in Wenden Grove. I'm one of the neighbours very close to number 11 rooming house applicants. And emotions are obviously very raw about this issue for those in opposition to the rooming house application. The reason is because the associated attachment to the harmony, street tranquility and peacefulness are things that are gifted to the street, things which can't just be materially built, but are developed over time, over decades, in fact. And that is now, make no mistake, going to be threatened. It's really, truly hard to reconcile that the BM Town Planning Report can reference a street with a vast majority of single-dwelling allotments on one hand, and then reference the largest by-floor area of these by far now being considered for a change of use as having, and I quote, a minimal impact upon the amenity of the surrounding area. That is just simply contradictory, please. We know that for a fact we'd be in for a complete change and that it will, without question, deviate away from the original purpose of the specifically allocated single-dwelling allotments for the street. This is now being effectively circumvented by an attempt at a small business enterprise in the form of a small hotel, dominant and right at the end of the cul-de-sac. The reason we know this will cause an issue is because we've experienced something similar 10 years ago when the previous owner sought to bring people from overseas and even locally to stay at that house from time to time. This change of dynamic amplified a very different feel of activity, which included heightened safety concerns, congestion and parking problems. Of note is that there were no more than 12 or 13 people, which included the family that was there.
Richard, that is 2 minutes. I'm really sorry to cut you short, but to be fair to everybody, that was 2 minutes. So if you want to say one more sentence or so, you're welcome to do that.
I was going to say that, look, to the councillors involved here, and I've spoken to most of you, and I really do appreciate that. And I also appreciate that the opportunity for your involvement and your own contributions to the community are valued by all of us. You're no doubt so much closer to the feelings and emotions that are running higher today, all of you. You are, after all, residents too in your own neighbourhoods and would be equally concerned if you knew that something you cherished was without question going to change.
Thank you very much. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sirkoff might want to ask you a
Hi,
question.
Richard. I would like to ask you a question, please. I'm just wondering, with the possible changes of possibly this rooming house going ahead, and how do you see the impact on the residents in a practical way of your day-to-day movements in the street?
I think what's going to be very obvious is the feeling of entering that street compared to what it was before. There's nothing inherently bad about a rooming house as such. In fact, all of us appreciate the concept of what a rooming house is trying to achieve. The main argument, in a nutshell, is that this specific location in this specific street is just inappropriate, end of story. And the fact that council planning have understandably ticked the boxes for a rooming house in general is one thing, but the fact that us as residents have lived in the street knowing what brought us to that street in the first place, a rooming house being there was not one of the reasons.
I guess I'm just really wanting to know that on a day-to-day basis, what are the practical issues that you'll be facing?
Practical issues are just the obvious. Even now, the hostility is coming about because of the lack of car park space. Although it might sound silly, we're not finding room outside of our houses to park our cars. And I don't want to steal other people's thunders who are actually suffering a lot more than ourselves. And look, I'm going to take the time to say this in fairness because we've got the applicants right. Now, I want to thank them in one respect for taking the trouble to try hard to look after the spaces because they do. But unfortunately, because of the number of cars, they are not able to control it. So that's one thing that they have not been able to do. And I appreciate that they've tried and that with just what they've got. But to answer your question, Christina, anyone going into that street and looking to see what's going to happen when we try to approach our houses, even for some people trying to get into their driveways, they cannot at the moment. And I'll leave that for some others to explain. But that is probably one of the biggest problems, serious problems that we have currently.
All right, thank you. I'll stop it there, just so we can be fair for everybody else.
That's your question, Chris.
Thank you. I call upon Delia Want, speaking to item 10.1, change of use of rooming house.
Hi, my name is Delia. I'm at number 7, Wenden Grove. The issue I have, or what we have, is that we've been in a situation when we moved into the street, there was one single very large family living in that house prior to the current applicant. So there were many people living in that house. The parking was horrendous. There were multiple cars coming and going at any given moment. We had our car hit twice. We had our side view mirror swished off. I had occasions the ambulance couldn't get through, so I saw them park up the street, run down the street to number 8 because there was nowhere to park. Quite often the cars would abut our driveway. The garage at number 11, even though it's a tandem car park, with even a single family, people of the same family living there, they never used it. In reality, that garage is not used. It's a hassle. It's a hassle to get into that garage. Much easier for them to park into the street. You would very often see people doing 20-point turns trying to get out of the cul-de-sac. It just limits access. So to have that many number of people living in that house doesn't work. And we know this because we've lived it. We've experienced it beforehand. So when we moved into the street and there were X number of people, adults living in that house, it was just awful. We really couldn't have a spot to park. Now, we have a garage, we have a driveway. Many times my driveway was blocked by another car who's abutting my driveway because they're trying to wedge themselves in the few spots that there are. So at the moment, by their own admission at the previous meeting, they said that they're going to market it as a high-end rooming house. which implies that these aren't going to be struggling students that don't have cars. Even when I was a struggling student, I still managed $150 to buy an old Volvo. So you can't assume that struggling students are going to have no cars and no friends with cars. So, you know, I fear for what will happen to the street if it becomes a rooming house, because we've lived it before. We know what will happen, and it's not pleasant. You know, it really isn't pleasant. So that's kind of where I'm going with my submission. Yeah.
Thank you for coming. I call upon Andrea Zoer, speaking to item 10.1, change of use of rooming house. Andrea, are you here? I'll skip it. Maybe they're coming later. All right. I call upon Marika Tashevica, speaking to item 10.1, change of use of rooming house.
Thank you, councillors, for your time and your effort and all that you do for us citizens. I've got 5 points. I'll be as brief as possible and succinct.
Thank you. Can you start with your name? And
yes, I'm
verb?
sorry. Marika Tashevska. Thank you, councillors, for the work you do for us and for your time and attention. I've got 5 points that I'll be hopefully succinct with. This is an extra large rooming house, and that's why it's come to attention. Otherwise, it would have been passed. It is 494 square metres in size, and it sits in a cul-de-sac of 35 metres long and 7.7 metres wide. The idea of having possibly up to 20 residents with 10 double bedrooms will bring all sorts of visitors, ambulance officers, visitors, and it will be highly congested. Delia has said that we've had experiences before where we've had multiple residents there and it's been very difficult to live with. Tonight, most of the people in the audience are from our area. 3/4 of the people sitting behind me are my neighbours. This is not a pinpoint problem. This is not one person. This is a large community problem, and it affects a lot of us. A lot of us are concerned and emotional about it. The planning department seems to have some sort of unusual agenda because they seem to be passing it quickly without consideration for the lack of parking. In their submission here, which I picked up from the front, they talk about parking. They don't say that it's tandem parking. They say that it's been passed based on existing conditions. This is not existing conditions. This is a new use. We can't have one house with 20 people using one car spot effectively.
And Marika, I'm really sorry, but that's 2 minutes already. If you'd like to make one more sentence, I'm okay with that.
Thank you. Also, I think council has a duty of care to our vulnerable neighbours. I won't say more because I respect their privacy. Unfortunately, council needs to think about the duty of care to the existing neighbours that we have as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
I call upon Stephen Beckwith, speaking to item 10.1, change of use to rooming house. Hi, Stephen. Can you start with your name, suburb, and 2 minutes, please?
My name's Stephen Beckwith. I live in the adjoining street, and my main points are that the street as it is now, we're finding the neighbours in that street are actually parking on the Montague Avenue side because their street's full, and we've now got them parking basically right at the front of my house. And you know, if it's opened up as a rooming house, it's going to just get worse. The other concern that I've got is it's a commercial enterprise. It's got a manager. And I don't know how many other staff it's got, but again, parking. And as a commercial enterprise, they're going to be looking for the biggest buck per bedroom, and that is backpackers. They're currently paying $120 a night. So that's what I think is going to end up happening to this place. Being close to Ackland Street, a bike ride away, a tram ride away, it's going to be backpackers. That's my worry. And it's going to severely affect the tranquility of the neighbourhood. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call upon Gillian Watt, speaking to item 10.1, change of use to rooming house. Hi, Gillian. Can you say your name and suburb? You have 2 minutes.
My name's Gillian Watt. I've been a resident of Montague Avenue in St Kilda East. It's just around the corner from Wenden. I've been there for 22 years. I want to dispute some definitions in the document prepared by Jeremy Newland, Senior Urban Planner for the City of Port Phillip, who approved the application to convert 11 Wenden Grove into a rooming house. Points 10.5 and 15.5 refer to the impacts on the character of the neighbourhood. He writes that as there are no external changes to the proposed dwelling, that means there's no change to the existing character of the street. I'm sorry, but neighbourhood character has very little to do with a building. Neighbourhood character has everything to do with the occupants of that building. A neighbourhood has good character when you can trust your neighbours with the keys to your house when you go on holidays. And you know that not only will they collect your mail, but they'll take your bins out and they'll put them back in again. A neighbourhood has good character when you can trust the teenager next door to babysit your children. A neighbourhood has good character when your neighbours invite you over for Christmas drinks. These are the things that impact the character of a neighbourhood. I believe, we all believe, that the character of our neighbourhood will be altered forever and detrimentally if this proposal goes ahead. The council talks of livable Port Phillip. Our quiet, livable street will become less livable if this goes ahead. The council's approval of this proposal has more to do with box ticking than with providing good, low-cost and stable accommodation for vulnerable people. This is another example of government reneging on its responsibility and handballing a much-needed service to the public sector. This is a commercial enterprise, not a social one. This is nothing more than a building owner trying to maximise profits. Greed before good. Ashley from the letting agent, Hipster Abode, even stated that this is not accommodation for, and I quote, the lowest of the low. This development is more akin to long-stay hotel or a backpackers. By approving this application, the Planning Department will now wipe its hands of all further responsibilities with little concern as to the impacts of their decisions. But you, the councillors, you have the power to overturn this decision and represent us, your constituents, not the private developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. For future speakers, we would like you not to name council officers. They are listed on the report, but it's not directed at officers, please. Fair enough. That's all right. Just reiterating that. Okay. I call upon Stephen Webster, speaking to item 10.1.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Hi.
Oh, sorry. Say your name and suburb, please, and you have 2 minutes.
Lachlan Webster. We're in 11 Martin Street, St Kilda East, which is the street that runs perpendicular to Wenden Grove. So our main point is that the dwelling, for our understanding, has a single occupancy covenant on it, which has been removed is that being removed to allow this building and this boarding house to go forth? What would then stop further developments like that to keep going ahead? What's to stop us from doing that to our property? And furthermore, we already live opposite the Sacred Heart Mission, which was not known to us at the time that we purchased this house and moved in. We've had multiple threatening instances that have involved police intervention to keep us and our family safe. So having a boarding house for who knows how many people, who knows the character and the quality of these people, moving into a family-orientated residential neighbourhood is beyond unacceptable. And the local council here has effectively shirked its responsibilities to protect the people that already reside within its council area, and it is absolutely unacceptable if you go ahead with this, and we will take any and all means to make sure that this doesn't happen.
Thank you. I call upon Alvy Webster, speaking to item 10.1, also virtual. Alvy,
yeah.
Oh, is that you? Okay.
I'm speaking on behalf of both of them, but I also just wanted to add that the amount of traffic that would, foot traffic and car traffic that would then put into our streets makes it virtually impossible to find parking. We're lucky we have a very big garage, but if you're adding another 20 cars into this residential street for families, is just absolutely abhorrent and unacceptable.
Thank you, Lachlan. I'll put that as well. Yeah. All right, moving on, I call upon Jenny Phillips speaking to item 10.1, change of use to rooming house. Hi, Jenny. Can you please say your name and suburb? And you have 2 minutes.
I'm Jenny Phillips. I live at 9 Wenden Grove, Kilda East, next door to number 11. First off, I'd like to speak about my driveway. It's directly opposite an area within the 10 metres of a T intersection where parking is not permitted. I frequently have asked people to please not park there because it makes it very hard for me to get in and out of my driveway. I've also asked the applicants, and he actually admitted himself that he forgets about my parking problems. So if a neighbour forgets, I hate to think that people who don't even know me will care. I've actually applied to the council to have this area made into a no standing zone. So I would ask that if the application is accepted, that it be conditional upon this area being made a no standing zone so that we could take photos and report and people could be fined. It would be great to have free and easy access to my own property. The other thing is a dedicated phone number for issues and complaints was mentioned. This would only be useful if the calls result in action. At the last meeting, the manager was hesitant to give her name, so that doesn't augur well for responsibility in my eyes. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Una McLevin, speaking to item 10.1. And I'm sorry if I get names wrong. Can you please say your name and suburb, please?
That's fine. Una McElvenna, I'm at Montague Avenue, St Kilda East, around the corner. I agree with everything that's been said already about parking and access. I just want to, my most important point, I think, is the fact that you are potentially going to put a commercial enterprise in the middle of a tiny residential cul-de-sac, a little dead-end street. There will be 13 rooms, each leased for who knows how long, to individuals, 13 individual households, in other words. I've looked up hipster abode. They rent to backpackers, students, homeless, anyone who will pay them. I don't think it's appropriate to put what is effectively a small backpackers hostel in the middle of a tiny dead-end street. This might work on Orrong Road or one of the main streets nearby, but not here. It's simply inappropriate to ruin the fabric of this neighbourhood with a business that's going to see people coming and going at all hours of the day and night. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Sharona Joffensberg, speaking to item 10.1.
Hi, and thank you for listening to me, and thanks for all the work the council does. My name's Sharona Josephsberg. My parents, they passed away in the last few years, but they own number 8 Montague Avenue, which is on the corner of Wenden, so it's right directly opposite the proposed rooming house. I mean, everything that's been said I totally agree with, and I know I was going to come more from an emotive point of view, whether it's acceptable or not, but I just want to say from my point of view, my parents were Holocaust survivors. They bought the land there. They wanted a peaceful surrounding. They lived there till they passed away, and my son and his wife and potentially a young family in the future will be living there, and I have real concerns. Just, kids in the street. That already, as we're on the corner, our driveway is in Montague Avenue, and we can't even get out sometimes. We have a double garage, but sometimes people park really close to the corner and on the other side. And I remember my mum already had lots of difficulty getting out of the driveway sometimes. Again, it was mentioned about the neighbourhood character. I think it will totally change the character. One of my main concerns was when my parents or elderly residents in the street needed emergency vehicles. If cars are parked on both sides of the road, an ambulance can hardly get through, and that was already a concern when I had to call the ambulance for my elderly parents, so that's a really important point for me. If emergency services can't get through, that's a real issue. I just appeal to you to block this, because it's just, every time I walk down the street I should have happy memories and everything, and it's very stressful. And my son, they're on their way back from Sydney, but they couldn't be here. But I know for them and raising a young family in the future, I think they're quite concerned about that.
Thank you. Can you also state your suburb for the record?
Oh yeah, Eastern Kilda. It's a property right across the road.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I call upon Sam Bove, speaking to 10.1.
Hi, I'm Sam Bove, the applicant for the proposed.
Sorry, and your suburb for the record, please?
Carlton North.
Thank you.
Yep, I'm acting on behalf of the owners. As per the consultation meeting, there seems to be 3 points that are the biggest issues here, which, one being parking, two being the type of people that are going to be attracted, and the number of people. We made it very clear in the previous meeting that it's only 13 people, not 20, which is effectively 5 more people that are currently there at the moment. So it feels to me that this is being blown out of all proportion. The report that was written by the planner, I think, was very well put together, identifying all the issues that relate to the planning scheme and so on, and we've met all of those issues, including parking. But having said that, we're more than happy to appease all concerned. So, if in regard to parking, even though we do meet the requirements, it's been raised that maybe we may even look at changing the parking situation there to permit parking and not giving any of the accommodation guests access to that parking. More than happy to have a look at that. Also, the type of people. Also, the type of people that are there. I think there's an assumption that the people that are going to come are of ill repute and that can't contribute to the community. Who's to say that one of the guests there are a lovely person who would like to babysit one of the neighbours? Why is this assumption being made that the new people that are going to be there are of ill repute? And we're talking about 5 extra people here. So, again, I'd just like to say that all of the conditions and recommendations that are being put together in the planning report, we're more than happy to adhere to those. So if a notice of decision was granted with those conditions, more than happy to do those, and also more than happy to have a look at the parking situation so that no guests have any access to parking on the street.
All right, thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Sorry, you might have a question here from Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Sam. I was just to your last couple of points. If there were conditions put in, say, a management plan that there was no access to parking for any of these residents, you would agree to that as a...
My client has given me the authority to say yes to that.
Say yes.
Yeah.
There's also I think it was, I can't remember if I read it or if it was stated in the briefings we had as councillors that the people who reside here were going to be students. If that was a condition in the management plan, would you be okay with that, so that it's not backpacks? You're fine with those conditions?
As I said, my clients are very eager to facilitate, an appeasement in the area. They want to be living in a happy community there. So I think they've come a long way to, to basically agree to all these conditions.
No, all right. Thank you. Just clarifying that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon Ronald Pose, speaking to item 10.1.
Ronald Pose. I'm in St Kilda East, just in Nottage Street. I can see the property from my bedroom window. I'm just in the next street. I think we've seen or heard today, and just by the number of objections, over 60, that this has been an issue that's brought together the whole community that I've never seen before. I mean, I've put in objections to various things over the years, and I'm lucky if I can get 1 or 2 people to support me. And here, I've met so many people I've never even met before over this one issue. So it's of such a concern to the neighbourhood that it is affecting the neighbourhood character. And what the City of Port Phillip has is a wide diversity of neighbourhoods and different characters. And this little pocket of East St Kilda, just at the far eastern side of the municipality, is one of the few areas left in that region which has a large number of family homes with families and children and so on. You just go a few streets further west towards St Kilda and it's apartments, it's flats and much higher density living. And of course we want this diversity of accommodation, but to change this little pocket into being a higher density, more commercial, different character basically means we're losing an aspect of housing diversity in the municipality rather than gaining anything. And this proposed rooming house is not going to cater for the socially disadvantaged groups. Okay, it is more upmarket. It's designed for commercial return, and that's just not appropriate for this little corner when you're dead-end street here. Now, as councillors, I hope that you would support your local community. Yes, the boxes have been ticked. The parking is an issue. It doesn't worry me in particular from my personal point of view, but the solution we just heard of putting permit parking in and not giving permits to the residents of this rooming house would basically change the character of everyone's parking and access to their properties for their visitors and everything else. So that's immediately changing, having a huge impact on the neighbourhood character if you put in permit parking.
Thank you, Ronald. That's 2 minutes. Appreciate you coming. Now, one more call for Andrea Zoer. No? All right. That's the end of the items on 10.1, but our format is to have all the speakers tonight speak in one go. So now I'm going to call upon Teresa Warren speaking to 10.4, South Melbourne Structure Plan. Hi, Teresa.
Hello.
You're an expert at this, so
I know I haven't spoken for a long time.
Thank you.
Teresa Warren, Dorcas Street, South Melbourne. I also happen to be Vice Chairperson of the Emerald Hill Court Residents Association. I'd like to thank and congratulate all the council staff who worked on setting up places for people to have the say, including, I think, for the first time ever, for taking the plans to the 2 large public housing estates in South Melbourne. I think that was a wonderful idea. There's lots of things I can talk about, but a couple of my main concerns I've noticed is footpath trip hazards caused by trees is a major concern. During the summer break, I will be writing up the list, and I like to suggest that then could council consider putting green instead of planting the trees in the ground, but to put them in tubs or planter boxes. Another one of the issue is I've noticed we have lots, especially at Emerald Hill, we have lots of senior people who who've got to use walkers. I have noticed that the traffic lights along Claverdon Street are not on green long enough. Older residents only get halfway across and the lights change. I like the idea that we don't lose the heritage aspects of South Melbourne. I love the South Melbourne market, but I think, yes, I would not like South Melbourne market to go the same way as Prahran market. And I just like you're trying to cater for all age and from people of different backgrounds. Although I could say a lot more, but knowing that I've only got 2 minutes, I will leave it at that. So thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Teresa. I call upon John Lowndes, speaking to 10.4 South Melbourne Structure Plan.
Hi. I think most people know at Council that I'm also the head of Park Towers Tenant Management, which is a tenants association there. We did have a visit with lots of boards and squares.
Can you do name and suburb first, please?
Sorry?
Name, suburb, and then you'll start.
Oh, John Lowndes, South Melbourne.
Thank you.
Sorry. I really, you know, apart from the $10 espressos, which I thought was a bit of a waste of money, really, we had very poor turnout because people just didn't know what it was about or when it was on. Even I didn't. Well, I wasn't notified. I was just leaving the building and saw it, chatted to the people, and it was about putting a coloured dot in a particular square. And I really think that sort of quantitative hit and miss kind of, way of surveying people is not very good. I think there's other more qualitative ways that can be dealt with, and I was on the Marina panel, and that was also really like push polling, and I know there's been a pandemic in between, but I just thought it was a very, very poor way of collecting information, and it should be more like, Hugh Mackay, who sits in a corner and just gets a bunch of people, gives them a subject, they forget he's there, and he just takes notes, It's a brilliant way of doing it, and I don't think you can say that he hasn't been successful in seeing trends. Now, also, sorry. Oh, yes. Look, there's the arts precinct. Now, there was really an organic arts precinct once there a long time ago. There was Multicultural Victoria, there was an art gallery within Emerald Hill Library, and, of course, AAV's always been there. You've lost Multicultural Victoria even before the roof fell in. We've lost Port Phillip Community Group's social worker used to see 2,000 people a year out of her office in that centre. And now property is telling me that they're going to rejig the 222 Bank Street, even though AAV offered to put in $1.4 million on an upgrade if it included a lift, so they'd retake the second floor.
Thank you. That's 2 minutes, but you're welcome to email us some other items if you have them. Thank you for coming down.
Okie doke.
I call upon Jamie Gray, speaking to 10.4, South Melbourne Structure Plan. Hi, Jamie. Name, suburb, please, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jamie Gray. I'm here to talk about 10.4 on behalf of some of the landowners in South Melbourne. Firstly, I'd like to thank Council for looking at revising the structure plan. I'm going to put my glasses on. Our concern is the population of South Melbourne declined between 2001 and 2010, picked up slightly in the last 10 years, but St Kilda, Port Melbourne, Collingwood, Richmond and South Yarra have had substantial population increases in that time. The key constraints that we're concerned about are outdated development controls, namely the conservative shadow controls, which are currently 10 a.m. to 2 p.m, as I think I've discussed with a few of you, and the built form controls, which are obviously very restrictive. I've actually sent each of you, or Urbis have sent each of you, which you may not have had a chance to read, an exec summary of what I'm discussing with you at the moment. Well, you would have got that between 5 and 5:30 this evening. I've got copies here if you would like them. The opportunities for increased and sensitive development. Increased development opportunities will drive population growth in South Melbourne, in our view, and achieve the level of densification and investment that is typically found in other inner city Melbourne major activity centres. enriched amenity that encourages and attracts next generation businesses and workers to fulfil South Melbourne's potential to become a genuine enterprise and creative precinct. The structure plan needs, in our view, to support respectful and relevant development within our heritage areas for South Melbourne to prosper moving forward. The contemporary zoning approach encouraged more mixed use by way of commercial 3 zone with the intent of enhancing and expanding existing creative industries and attracting new and emerging businesses. Built form recommendations, ours are that consideration should be given to introducing maximum building heights in addition to current maximum street wall heights to provide certainty, noting similar main streets and other activity centres typically have provisions for overall height of 3 to 5 storeys. Consideration should be given to increasing heights in the opportunity pockets, noting flanks to the side of the main street and other activity areas typically have greater heights.
Jamie, that is 2 minutes. If you can wrap it up, maybe
Absolutely.
a sentence or two.
So essentially, I've provided each of you, even though I can't show them here, some very simple diagrams that show the difference between the winter solars to 10 a.m. and 11 a.m., which essentially takes you from a 6-storey building restriction at the moment to potentially up to 10 or 12. Doesn't mean people will build that high. Obviously, that would only be relevant on sites that were big enough to sustain that sort of development. But I thought it might be useful for all of you to see some diagrams. I know I showed them to a few of you yesterday, which I think simplifies the problem that we've got at the moment. And I think, last but not least, most other inner city councils have changed their regulations in order to facilitate appropriate development.
Thank you for
Very
coming
much for your time.
and circulating that to councillors every email.
Thank you.
All right, the next section is for item 14.1. There is a motion on the bike lanes. We have 14 speakers. You've all seen how quick 2 minutes goes, so get to your points quickly, please. I have to be pretty spot on for 2 minutes. I remind everybody to be respectful. There's passion on both sides, so please, when someone's speaking, don't laugh out, don't make noises. Please be respectful. All right. I first call upon Vicky Ho, speaking to item 14.1. That's virtual. Do we have Vicky? Oh, is Vicky here in person, maybe? Or we'll come back, all right? Okay. Next one, I call upon Julie Clutterbeck, speaking to item 14.1 in virtual. Do we have Julie?
Hi, this is Julie Clutterbuck from Elwood, representing the Port Phillip Bicycle Users Group.
Hi, Julie.
This motion requests removal of the pop-up bike infrastructure trial elements. It relies on support from a report by the Traffics Group. Firstly, I'll state the bug's position on the pop-up trial, and then I'll make further comments on that report. We actually made a community user experience survey of the pop-up infrastructure. The general assessment was that there may be modest safety improvements for pedestrians and people on bikes. We recommend that the trial runs to completion and that data is gathered on whether safety has improved, and then retain the changes or modify as appropriate. The exception here is Westbury Street, where our members have documented some concerning incidences, which should be investigated. Secondly, the ROP report. We find the report entirely flawed, and we've listed many problems and errors with it on our webpage. The report is only independent to the extent that it fails to disclose its funding source. It's actually a paid piece of advocacy paid for by members of the ROP group. It's not expert.
Sorry.
It fails to comply with basic standards for the provision of expert evidence.
I think a point of order, please.
What's the point of order?
49.3 Part E.
Thank you.
For an error of fact.
All right. Julie, I'd like to have you withdraw the statement about who... Oh, sorry. I have to go back. New to this job. Christina, Councillor Sirkoff, what is the error of fact?
I dispute that the ROP actually had anything to do with commissioning this report.
All right. Julie, can you please withdraw that statement?
I'm relying on media things that...
we cannot rely on media.
Okay, I think that it might be safer to just proceed with not saying who commissioned the report if we don't know that for sure.
I'm happy to
Thank
say
you.
that
Keep going.
it's not clear who commissioned that report, and an expert report should disclose its funding sources. This report's not expert, fails to comply with basic standards for the provision of expert evidence, such as clearly flagging matters of opinion. Even the report's author has confirmed in the press that it was never intended to be an expert report. The report contains many factual errors. For example, it advocates no safety improvements on Marine Parade Ormond Esplanade should be needed because there's a parallel off-road bicycle path. This is wrong for the majority of this road section. There's a stark difference between a bicycle path and a shared user path. The St Kilda foreshore is shared between people walking and riding. Councillors have given a lot of thought to mitigations on the conflict between different user groups in this area. But the suggestion that hundreds of extra cyclists should move off the road onto this already crowded promenade is just silly.
Julie,
Quite the opposite. We should be making the road more attractive and safer choice for more people.
Julie, if you can hear us, the 2 minutes has come to an end. If you can add your last point, please.
Yep. My request is that the councillors let the trial go ahead, make your decisions based on data, not opinion or scaremongering, and actual support substantial safety improvements for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. I call upon Alison McCormack, speaking to item 14.1. Oh, we don't have Alison either. I'll move it to the end in case she does come on. Thank you. I call upon Matthew Fagan, speaking to item 14.1. Hi, Matthew. Can you say your name, suburb, and you have 2 minutes.
Matthew Fagan, Middle Park. I have some pictures I need to hand out so you can see what I'm talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. I'm not talking.
Some pretty pictures.
I'm only talking about one particular construction. This is the intersection of Marine Parade and Glenhuntly Road. The front picture shows the site you see on a bicycle at, say, 40, 50 kilometres an hour. What you can barely see is about 2 seconds away. This is a route used for the Commonwealth Games in 2 years. It's not for the Commonwealth Games, they're around the various places, but I have a team of about 20 people who've ridden up this road for more than 25 years. That is so dangerous, I can't understate it. If you turn to the next page, you'll see what you will hit if you don't see it coming. Now, when people ride in a pack, the front guy might see it and swerve. The second guy might swerve. The third guy doesn't have time to swerve. This is lethal. This is not a safety feature. I cannot even understand what it's doing there. Now, last weekend when we had the Ironman, the safety officer from the Ironman, the professional riders, went and put witches' hats around this stuff because it's so dangerous. Please, if you're going to do a trial, don't trial this because it's a man trap. Not everything. I cannot understand most of the constructions I've seen, but this is a pile of concrete blocks bolted in the middle of a road where cyclists regularly ride, and it is invisible. And that's, on a bright day, that's today. On a cold winter's day with the rain coming down and cyclists moving in a pack, if it's a peloton, they're doing 70 kilometres an hour, you've got dead people. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I call upon Jan Talako, speaking to item 14.1. Please say your name and suburb. You have 2 minutes.
My name's Jan Talako. I live in St Kilda. Thank you, Mayor and Councillors, for your time. I am one of the people who commissioned the traffics report. I'm not a member of ROP, and ROP did not commission the report. My reason for commissioning the report is because it's very clear, it's plain when you look at these concrete blocks and other installations that they're dangerous. The report that has been written by Traffics is an independent report. It was never characterised as an expert report for VCAT purposes. The consultants were asked open questions about whether they considered these installations to be dangerous. And I presume that all the councillors have seen the report and read it. But however, I'd just like to draw your attention to the concluding paragraph, which I'll read to you. The independent experts say, overall, we consider that in addition to the visual clutter, the vast majority of the pop-up bike lane infrastructure either offers limited benefit for cyclists or results in an increased risk to road users, including both motorists and cyclists, and they then call for it to be removed. And I think I'd just like to say a couple of things in response to Ms Clutterbuck's comments. First of all, I'm here not representing anybody. My concerns are about community safety. I'm a cyclist. I cycle every day. And frankly, I've never heard of the Port Phillip Bicycle Users Group. I don't know who they represent. I'm not aware of anyone who's a member of it. And I'm not aware that they are traffic engineers. So the conclusions in this report are not mine. And I think we should think very carefully about the notion of continuing a trial to gather more what I think Ms Clutterbuck described as data. The sort of data that would be collected, I presume, would be injuries or deaths, and against what sort of metric would that data be measured? I think it's plain to all of us that the overwhelming view in the community is that this has been a fiasco. There was no consultation. The design of these structures is inappropriate and misconceived, and I would urge all of you, councillors, to support the motion that's before you tonight, which aligns with the views of all of the candidates, all 4 major candidates at the recent election, the elected MLA for Albert Park and the federal member Josh Burns, who have both made unequivocal statements committing to the removal of all of this infrastructure. Please remove it from our suburbs.
You've had your chance. Thank you very much. I'll call upon Mark Naughton, speaking to item 14.1. Hi, Mark. Name, suburb, 2 minutes, please.
Mark Norton, Middle Park, avid cycler. What is or was the problem that needed to be solved by these works? I don't believe that you can tell us. Your administration cannot tell us. The Department of Transport cannot tell us. That's why I'm the other bloke who commissioned the report with Jan. What was the problem that needed to be solved? What was the reason for these installations being put in place? Nobody can answer that. No safety audit's been done by anybody else. No data has been collected by anybody else. So what do? We go out to a very reputable traffic engineering firm. They don't put their name to rubbish. They will only put their name to comments and opinions which they hold and are prepared to put into the public domain. We're not letting go of this. I believe tonight you are going to water down this motion. Don't do it, please. This problem is not going away. If there's a coronial inquiry in relation to these installations, I'll be there and you will be there too. Get rid of this rubbish, please, on our
Point of order,
roads.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you.
Under the local laws, I don't actually have to quote a section, but I think that's offensive and aggressive behaviour that you should pull up.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. I call upon Peter Carshall, speaking to item 14.1. Please remember what I said at the beginning about respect. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Peter Crashow. I live in Westbury Street in St Kilda East. Okay, so I'm hoping all the councillors have seen firsthand what is probably the most dangerous bike lane installation is on Westbury Street. And if you haven't seen it, I'll remind you of what I see daily and weekly. I pretty much see a bike lane slapped in the middle of a bike of a street. That's first of all. I see a bike lane having to narrow to about 1 metre to pass 5 tree beds. So pretty much the bikes are going along, and then I've got it narrowed down, and there's cars on the left-hand side, so it's pretty hairy. I see cyclists having to merge when they get to the end of the middle of the bike lane to look over their left shoulder and then look over for traffic and then get onto the proper side of the road. So that's dangerous within itself. I also see that the concrete curbs that have been installed to separate the middle of the bike lane and the car lane, and they've all got tyre scuff marks on them. So that's sort of telling me that there's no room for movement for anything at all. I also see delivery vans and removalists. They all park in the middle of the bike lane, and so when the bikes are coming, they've got nowhere to go but to go onto the car lane. So it's pretty sort of messed up. And then the other thing I see also is I see cars that swerve to miss the speed humps, and then they go into the bike lane and they go back and they go back, zigzagging through. So I see all this stuff every day. I'm really worried that I'm going to see a death or a fatality. There's already been 2 instances where there's been, it was on the news, a cyclist had a car U-turn in front of the person. Another lady, an elderly lady, early doors, pardon the pun, opened her car door and got her car shunted. I don't really care about all this stuff. This is not really my domain, but I'm just worried that someone's going to get killed. And this is my last word on this, because I really can't believe the bureaucracy we're going through, fluffing around. I just want this thing on Westbury Street removed. That's 2 minutes.
Spot on. Thank you, Peter. I call upon Terry Thompson, speaking to item 14.1. Hi, Terry. Name and suburb, 2 minutes, please.
My name's Terry Thompson. I'm a resident of Kerford Road and one of the residents who coordinated the original parking separated bike lane petition relating to Kerford Road residents. Following the Department of Transport consultation held in Kerford Road, we were informed in a formal letter from the Department of Transport signed by Fatima Mohammed, and I quote, "Therefore I can confirm, after having reviewed all the feedback received, that we will withdraw our proposed designs for pop-up bike lanes on Kerford Road. This means there will be no, we will not make any changes to Kerford Road as part of the pop-up bike lane program." That's the end of the quote. The Shrine to the Sea team maintained that they work closely with their project partners, that is the City of Port Phillip and the Department of Transport. You can imagine our surprise when we read in the Shrine to the Sea October newsletter that they are currently evaluating 5 different bike lane and road configurations based on feedback they have received to date. I have had a number of neighbours contact me with their concerns again. We would like to know the 3 following questions. What are these 5 different bike lane and road configurations for Kerford Road? 2, on consultation, we would like to know who in Kerford Road has formed part of this consultation. As a resident of Kerford Road, I'd like to ensure we have been represented in any consultative meetings regarding changes to Kerford Road. And finally, what is the current position of the City of Port Phillip regarding any proposed bike lane changes in Kerford Road? Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Those questions will be taken on notice and the answers will be in the minutes or circulated to you. All right, I call upon Adam Blandford, speaking to item 14.1. Hi, Adam. Name, suburb, and 2 minutes, please.
I'm Adam Blandford, Westbury Street, St Kilda East, and I'm making my comment question in support of item 14.1 by Councillor Sirikoff on the pop-up bike lanes. Dear councillors, I've been a Westbury Street resident for over 12 years now, and during these 12 years I've cycled to work 2 to 4 days per week, depending on the weather, without incident. In the last 5 months I've had multiple close calls, both as a cyclist and while driving my car, and I've also witnessed many more near misses. I've engaged in this community action for my very first time for one reason. I can't wear on my conscience someone getting hurt without taking some action to try and affect change. And I appreciate that both our state and our federal MPs have advocated for removal of the pop-up bike lanes. And I also appreciate Mr Chatterbox, the Port Phillip Bicycle Users Group, also advocating for the removal of the treatments on Westbury Street. My question for each of you is simple. Are you really willing to wear on your conscience the escalating risk of a serious injury just in order to allow a trial to continue when there is such clear evidence of the significantly worse safety hazards? I'm an advocate for investment in improved and effective bike lane infrastructure. What we have in Westbury Street is not this. It's a shambles, and I implore you to take action and seek immediate removal of the pop-up bike lane treatments as a matter of urgency before someone ends up in hospital or worse. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I call upon Cameron Smith, speaking to item 14.1. Hi, Cameron. Name, suburb, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Cameron Smith, South Melbourne. I'm averaging 117 seconds for this, so I should be good. So I speak in support of Councillor Sirikos' motion. There's 4 relevant facts here. Point 1 was safety. The gentleman speaking about Glen Huntly Road and Westbury Street have made that point. I also note in the 7th of September Council meeting, clause 535 of the relevant agenda, that the Department of Transport acknowledged that the Nelson Road treatments didn't actually add to safety or do anything for the safety of cyclists as well. So to Mr Norton's comment, these just haven't added anything and nobody understands why. So that's safety. Politics. We've got the feds and the states in rare agreement on a topic in full. They say get rid of it in full, not parts of the trial. The remaining 90% probably need to go. And, you know, and there's another data fact. We're all on about the data. So the ALP, the Liberals and the Greens got 86% of the vote in the seat of Albert Park, and they were all advocating for removal. So 86% of the voters in Albert Park were following candidates that wanted the bike lanes removed. So that's point 2. The politics are sorted. The independent report. Traffics does work for the PTV, the DOT. They meet government procurement standards and I think for the city of Port Phillip. So Traffics are okay to go on being able to produce reliable work. And budget. As I've confirmed through council staff to the Mayor's office, the budget exists for all this to go. So what have we got? We've got a safety angle we need to address. We've got the politics lined up. We've got an independent report from a party that works for government, and we've got the money that's coming from somebody else. It's a pretty straightforward thing to get rid of these installations. So it's a straightforward decision to remove all of them, not just what was in the original motion. And again, to a previous speaker's point, we are not going to let this go on 1 or 2 installations being removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask somebody in the back corner if you can pull the blind down a little bit, please? I think we're copying it over here. Is that helping? Oh.
That's good.
Yep, thank you. All right, I call upon Una Steele speaking to 14.1.
Good evening. Una Steele, Westbury Street, St Kilda East. We are here to complain regarding the pop-up lanes in Westbury Street and surrounding areas. I am a keen cyclist and supportive of designated bike lanes. However, they have to be the right bike lanes and safe bike lanes. These lanes installed without community consultation are neither. Unfortunately, this route and many others are now extremely dangerous. They have been turned into hazardous areas of concrete slabs, speed bumps, bollards, lane separators and hazard paint, and are often very close together. I have taken numerous cyclists along these routes, particularly the Westbury Street route, where the crossing of Nepean Highway and Carlisle Street are a death trap, along with the intersection at Marine Parade. All riders have strongly criticised the designs and infrastructure. A huge amount of evidence in the form of videos, photos, emails, evaluations have been sent to Council, DOT and MPs, etc. by the community, all condemning the bike lanes. So we've lived amongst these lanes for nearly 6 months. What have we learnt? 1, that new or experienced riders are confused and intimidated by these changes. 2, that drivers are confused and more aggressive due to these changes. 3, that cyclists have already been hospitalised and numerous near misses due to lack of visibility and space for all road users. 4, that the police have already informed the community that the changes to Westbury are unsatisfactory in its current form, and that they expressed their concerns to Council as they've attended quite a few collisions. 5, that more than ever we would like a return to normality and have these lanes removed. We don't want any modifications, tree removals or parking reductions. 6, we want to coexist on the roads with all road users as safely as possible. Lastly, we appreciate the support and help received from some of the councillors. You know who you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Ina. I call upon Marcel Randels, speaking to item 14.1.
My name is Marcel Randels. I have lived in Middle Park for 20 years and I've ridden a bike 10,500 kilometres this year. So I like to use my bike, essentially. I would describe these bike lanes as dangerous, ugly and unjustified. First of all, damaged heritage. I think it's great that we have a heritage listed neighbourhood. You guys worry about what colour we paint our house. Fair enough. We have a beautiful neighbourhood and we want to keep it that way. Painting our streets yellow, I don't think is in line with that at all. They are described as pop-up. They were described as a temporary pop-up. In reality, the workers installing the paint, you had to use blow torches to burn the paint into the road. I struggled to call that pop-up. When I actually called them pop-up to the workers, they laughed in my face. They are also obstacles. I'm part of the packs that ride down Beach Road. We pretty easily do over 50 k's an hour. Outside the BP in St Kilda, just down the road on Beach Road, just down the road from Luna Park, there is now a separation aimed at making a separate bike lane so the cars don't get away in the bike lane. In reality, this is the BP Sprint. Everybody knows that. Regularly hit 55, 6 k's an hour, and now there's an obstacle in the middle of the road. We come through here about 6:45 in the middle of winter. You can't see it. There's a pack of up to 50 people behind you. Not everyone's going to avoid it. Next, I live in Page Street, Middle Park. Quiet, residential, 40-kilometre-hour street. Now there's 2 massive yellow lines on it. These yellow lines are thicker and brighter than the yellow lines on the ascent to Falls Creek. I find that hard to justify, that these lines on a residential street with giveways at every intersection are more important than the lines on Falls Creek. What makes Middle Park is nice, open, wide, beautiful streets. Now we have streets that, although technically the same, they feel more cramped and I feel like it loses a bit of the essence of the neighbourhood. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll call upon George Hibbard, speaking to 14.1.
G'day, George Hibbard. I live in Brunswick now, but I grew up in Albert Park and my mother lives in Port Melbourne, so I visit her on a regular basis. Both of us use the bike lanes on Bridge Street very regularly, and it's a massive improvement. Really is night and day, a lot safer, a lot better, and it actually has led to people, including her, riding more often. This motion really throws the baby out with the bathwater. There are clearly a couple of flaws with what's been rolled out. That's the point of a trial. You see what works and you see what doesn't. We should let this trial play out to its conclusion, let it be properly analysed by the public servants who are paid to do so at DOT, and take on board their recommendations in a measured and data-based manner. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Hey. Thank you. I now call upon Gavin Randalls, speaking of 14.1.
Good evening, Gavin Randalls, Middle Park. I live in, like Marcel said, I live in Page Street, a very quiet street in a very quiet neighbourhood. As somebody said before, all this stuff is a solution chasing a problem. I've been in that street, been in that neighbourhood for 25 years. I used to walk my kids to school. I've seen plenty of children and cyclists and cars wandering around that neighbourhood. There's never been a problem. And then without any consultation, last year, all this stuff appeared in our street. And all this stuff, lumps of concrete, bollards, bright yellow lines baked into the street, all this does is confuse people and add to the obstructions on the road without actually recognising and understanding that cyclists and pedestrians and cars do have to share the space. And they're not complete idiots. And they can govern these and negotiate these interactions by themselves without having their total environment cluttered with this infrastructure. So I'm bewildered as to why this has happened. Like most neighbours, like most people in the neighbourhood, we were not consulted. We were not asked what we thought about this and did we have any sensible feedback about these proposals. They just appeared. And as my son said, it was not, it was described as pop-up. There's nothing pop-up about it. It looks exceedingly permanent and exceedingly expensive. So I'm really hoping that it can all be removed and we can get back to the very beautiful, lovely streets we used to have. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call upon Vicky Ho. I believe you're online for item 14.1. Do we have Vicky?
Yes.
Hi, Vicky. Can you say your name and suburb? And you have 2 minutes.
Vicky, suburb South Melbourne, Park Street, South Melbourne. I have 2 young kids, 2 preschool kids, and me and my husband are residents of Port Phillip for more than 20 years. My husband's a cyclist. And what I want to say is we've lived here for so long with the parking at the moment, in between the bike lanes and the road. It feels like it has narrowed down the road, and I actually don't really feel safe because I can't see the cars coming from Kingsway down Park Street. And when I'm having 2 kids crossing the road, all with groceries, I don't know, I just find that, I don't feel safe. I think it's an accident waiting to happen. I would like the bike lanes to be removed, or if it's not going to be removed, I'd rather have the car park next to the curb, and then the bike lanes, and then the road. At least the road is wider for me to able to see oncoming cars.
Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you.
A letter was also received from Mr. Josh Burns, federal member from McNamara, who is currently overseas, relating to item 14.1. I'll ask Head of Governance to read that out on his behalf.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Dear City of Port Phillip Mayor and Councillors, first of all, congratulations to the new Mayor and Deputy Mayor, Heather Consola and Bond. I look forward to working collaboratively to achieve good outcomes for our local community. I write regarding the City of Port Phillip and the Department of Transport's pop-up bike lanes in the McNamara area. This is an issue that is rightfully concerning to the local community from pedestrian and road users alike. Although I cannot attend in person on Thursday, 8 December, I echo the concern raised by the community, many of whom are attending the council meeting on Thursday to have their say. My office has received a large amount of correspondence from community members highlighting serious safety concerns and massive inconveniences that are pop-up bike lanes. Throughout November, my team and I met with a range of locals to hear their concerns. It's clear there are genuine worries about public safety from people who love and want to see our community thriving. Public safety matters, and I know my state counterpart Nina Taylor has been advocating for the removal of these pop-up bike lanes behind the scenes with a great level of urgency. I fully support Nina Taylor in this endeavour, and I'll continue to advocate for the removal of these pop-up bike lanes. I urge Council and Department of Transport to work collaboratively to come up with a different solution that doesn't negatively impact our local community. Yours faithfully, Josh Burns, MP, Federal Member for McNamara. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anybody else who was missed tonight? That registered, by the way? Who? Oh, okay. Yes, Alison is having a hard time connecting, so would you mind reading Alison McCormack's item on 14.1? Thanks.
Ms McCormack has written, my name is Alison McCormack, the CEO of Bicycle Network and also a resident of Port Phillip. City of Port Phillip's Move, Connect, Live Integrated Transport Strategy 2018 to 2028 indicated that the active transport would have a critical role to play in ensuring that Port Phillip was livable and sustainable into the future. Is that strategy still on track? And what, if any, will be the impact of prematurely removing any of the pop-up bike lanes installed this year? As an advocacy organisation, we are concerned about the impact of these changes on the ongoing commitment to bicycle infrastructure, and how can we ensure these progress?
Thank you. That's the conclusion of public question time. I think we should take a 5-minute break and then we'll get into the next part. Yep. So the time is 8:05. We'll call it 8:10 when we come back. Thank you. It's our final meeting for the year and there's big topics. As you can see, so many people coming to speak tonight. All right. Now we're going to move on to councillor question time. Councillors, do you have any questions you would like to raise that are in general format, not to a specific item tonight? Councillor Pearl?
Would we be able to table the total cost that's been spent by the state government on the Shrine to Sea project, please?
I think we'll have to take that on notice unless somebody wants... Yep, thank you. We'll take that on notice. Next, we're going to move on to the sealing schedule. Councillors, we have no items for sealing on tonight's agenda. Next item, petitions and joint letters. Councillors, we have no petitions or joint letters on tonight's agenda. So we'll move into presentation of reports. Councillors, councillors will now move through the presentation of reports. We'll start with 10.1, which is change of use to boarding house. Yep. Rooming house. It says boarding house mine, I'm sorry. Rooming house. Apologies, I'm just reading the script and I should be thinking a bit more actively, sorry. Are there any questions of the officers in relation to this report? Councillor Crawford?
I have quite a few. I guess I just wanted to clarify that this decision is a planning decision. So what are we able to make the decision based on? Like what's assessed in coming to this decision that under our legal obligation?
Through you, Mayor. Under consideration is a residential use within a residential zone, of which it is, and also car parking, which requires under the planning scheme 2 spaces for the number of bedrooms which it provides for.
Could I follow up then? So I know that there are various concerns that have been expressed tonight. We are actually not under the planning scheme able to consider those technically. Like that is not what we're here to assess tonight.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, that's correct. We can only assess what is within the parameters of the planning scheme.
Can I ask, is there any way that we can add conditions to this permit, should it be given, that could address some of these concerns?
Through you, Mayor, yes, that is correct. Because the use requires a permit, council is entitled to put on relevant permit conditions for that use.
Can I keep... Yeah, if anyone else put your hand up and I'll stop. Can I ask a question? I know that there are some people who say we should refuse it and it could go to VCAT. What will VCAT assess on? Is it going to be, again, just the planning scheme that will be assessed at VCAT?
Sorry, through you, Mayor. VCAT will look at some of the issues that have been raised, such as the car parking, and when there's been a level of car parking complied, meets the requirements of the scheme, they'll typically say matters like that are not before us. So while we are required to consider car parking as one of the design requirements and the provision under the scheme. Where it meets that standard, they'll typically say that matter's not before us. And that can also be related to things such as the types of people that might be there. If it's not a decision guideline that we're required to consider under the planning scheme, it's not something that they will say they're able to consider as well. It's not a matter that they will listen to. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a lot of questions. So some of the concerns on the street parking, we do, under a separate process, we do have where council can consider putting signage in for 2 hours or permit parking. That would be separate to what we did here tonight, if that was something the residents on that street would like to go through.
Yeah, that would be a separate matter that could be considered through other means. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, Councillor Martin.
Under any management plan, are we able to make provisions to the sort of people who would be residing in the rooming house? So could we say it was only for people of my age or only for people who are students or something like that? Is that the sort of thing we can do, or is that something that we're not able to do?
The types of people aren't necessarily a consideration under the relevant controls, but we can rely on the submission of the applicant. So they can present a particular case of how they envision their development operating, and that's what they've done in this case. They have suggested that they're primarily going to be having students there, and they currently have an association with a company that helps them place students in the site. So in that regard, we could condition those sorts of things if it's consistent with what's being presented to us.
And as a follow-up, if in 3 months later the applicant then decides that he's going to make it a home for the elderly, can that just happen, or would another process need to take place before that could happen?
So if we have conditions on a permit that do control those types of things, so once it does go on the permit, it would require a Section 72 amendment to that permit. And typically amendments that will change what the permit allows would require additional notification of the neighbours and go through that whole planning process again.
Thank you. Any other questions tonight? If not, councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Councillor Bond has moved. What do you want to move?
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation with a number of changes to the conditions. And the conditions I would like to add to deal with Section 4, the on-site management plan. I would like to add in 5 additional points to the on-site management plan. Point I, following on from point H, no more than 2 cars in total are to be owned by the residents of the rooming house at any one time, and these 2 cars must be parked within the garage upon designated tandem car parking space located on the land and must not be parked on the street at any time. J, car and bicycle parking areas must be kept available for these purposes only and must not be used for any other purpose such as storage. K, only students may reside at the rooming house at any time. L, rooming house welcome packs must be provided to each student outlining tram, train and bus timetables relevant to the local area and to be provided to each student upon the commencement of occupation of a room. M, train, tram and bus timetables together with a map of those locations must be clearly located within the common area and or erected near the entrance of the rooming house.
Thank you. Does anyone want to second that? Councillor Baxter? Thank you. Councillor Bond, would you like to... Oh, sorry. Can you use your microphone?
Is this an appropriate time to ask a question about the wording on the first point, or is that later?
Yes.
I just wonder, is it owned or have? Like, how can we tell if they own? I just wondered if it's more 2 people have a car. You know what I mean? I guess it's just an odd word.
Even if they're using a car share is what you're sort of suggesting? Officers, does anyone want to weigh in on that?
may
Through
be
you, Mayor,
irrelevant.
the intention of the condition is basically to have only 2 cars belonging to residents of the site at any time. Doesn't matter whether they own it or have it.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to
I will speak to this. Address a couple of points that were raised by some of the objectors here tonight. When officers look at neighbourhood character, they're referring to the built form character of the street as defined within the planning scheme. They're not looking at other, what we might call subjective measures of character in the street. Our officers don't go along and say, well, these are the sort of people who are going to be living here. How does that fit into the planning scheme? And how does those sorts of people measure up against the sort of people currently living in the street? They're not there making assessments of anyone living in the street, whether they're from the applicant's house or the next door neighbour or anyone else in the street. It's purely a planning definition of neighbourhood character. And as if you've read the report tonight, and as a number of the objectors have pointed out, this. They refer to this as a box-ticking exercise, which is a little bit unfair. This application does meet many of the elements of the planning scheme. In fact, most of the elements of the planning scheme, which is why the officers in their professional opinion have recommended us approve the development here tonight, or approve the application here tonight, because in their professional opinion, it meets all the requirements of the planning scheme, and I've got no doubt that is the case, and I've got no doubt that VCAT would also see that's the case if we were to reject this tonight and go along. The built form of this building is relatively fixed. They're not changing any of that, so it is an existing building. It's there, so there's not too much we can do to the existing building. There are a couple of things we can do to address many of the concerns that were raised tonight. One of the, I think most people raise a concern about parking, so we're going to put some conditions in the management plan to ensure that the residents of this building are not taking up any car parking spaces in the street or in any neighbouring streets, so they're not adding or shouldn't be adding to any of the additional parking pressures in the street that we all know we experience, not just in this area but across all of Port Phillip. Our parking is our number one issue. So we've got some conditions in here to ensure that this building will not add to that or address that. The applicant's given us an assurance that he intends to rent this out to students, so if anyone fears it may be some sort of other type of accommodation, backpackers for example, we've got a condition in here in the management plan to ensure that it is students, and that adequate public transport is available to those students so that they can use public transport wherever they need to go. So that's the reason behind many of the conditions here. I know many people want us to reject this outright, but it is a largely compliant application. There's very limited tools available to us to say we can knock it back on these particular grounds. But because it is a rooming house, we can use the management plan to address many of the concerns of the local residents. And then if they do want to change this management plan at any point in time, as you heard from the officers, they need to come back to council and get their management plan amended through a Section 72 or an entirely new application, depending on what it is they want to do. So there will be opportunities, should they wish to change the use, for you to also have, as residents, to have a say in what that is. So I know this may not be the answer many were looking for tonight, but within the tools available to us, this is as dealing with as many of what you consider to be the issues, what I've heard tonight to be the issues, as best we can as a council through the planning scheme, which is the scheme that we are assessing this application under tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, would you like to speak to it?
Thank you. Yeah, look, like Councillor Bond, I agree that there's little room to move in terms of amendments that we could make to this application. It meets the planning scheme in many ways, and if we were to refuse it would go to VCAT, we may find it difficult to defend our position, although that remains to be seen. I have normally in planning applications, it's extremely difficult or virtually impossible to condition anything about the kind of people who will be in a building, right? Normally you can't say to anyone who's applying to build something, sure, you can build it, but you can only have, I don't know, young women live there or something like that. Normally that's impossible. In this case, though, because there is a rooming house and there is a management plan there, we are able to do some stuff. So this is actually far further than we would normally able to condition that sort of thing on a planning application. We have certainly heard from the applicant that their intention is to rent it out to students, and so we've conditioned it accordingly. And if that's what they want to do, then great. There's no problem having a condition about that. Obviously, one of the main concerns of a lot of the objectors was the parking situation and the nature of the street itself and also the streets around it. And I've been to that location, and I acknowledge that it is a really tricky location for parking. The Councillor Bond's amended motion here, I believe, will go some way to reassuring some of the residents who were concerned about that, in that it basically requires that there be no more than 2 cars and that they remain on site, and also that if there are only going to be 2 cars there, the assumption being that other people will ride or take public transport, well, we're going to make sure that everything possible is done to encourage that by giving people, the timetables and making sure that the bike storage space is kept unhindered. So I think this is really the most council can do to address the concerns of a lot of the objectors within the planning scheme. I believe that the applicant will accept these conditions, and then we can get to a resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Martin.
Like nearly all my council colleagues, I've been up to Wenden Street. It is a delightful little street, and I can well understand the fears that have been expressed. And if council granted a permit for some of the things that had been suggested by the residents, I think I would be just as concerned as they would be. But I note that as well as the conditions that Councillor Bond has added, there are already conditions that limit the number of people who can be under the roof at any one time, so no more than 13 people and so on. There are a range of conditions that if the applicant chooses to reject those conditions, the applicant has to then go to VCAT to try to overturn those conditions. If the applicant breaches the conditions, council can take action against the applicant, and if the applicant in future tries to change those conditions, the applicant can't do that without the permission of a further council meeting, without the residents being consulted. So I think there are enough fail-safe measures there that have been built in to make sure that this is probably the best outcome we can find as a council for the residents. If we reject the application outright, there's every chance the applicant would be successful at VCAT without the conditions that Councillor Bond has put on tonight. We think, given what the applicants told us and with the conditions that Councillor Bond's put up, I think this is probably as good an outcome as we can get for the residents. So I hope my council colleagues will support the motion.
Any other speakers? Councillor Crawford.
I'll just quickly add to it. Look, I understand change and these kind of things can be really difficult. I know it's an emotional issue, planning changes. But we are under the Act having to make decisions as a planning committee tonight. Look, in some ways, the size of the building and the number of rooms or people has triggered a permit. Otherwise, it wouldn't require a permit and none of these things could be addressed. So in some ways, it's kind of a good thing that it's come to a permit, because otherwise and we wouldn't have any say in it. And neither would the community. So we've heard your concerns and we totally understand. I don't want to mislead you that refusing this application would get you the good outcome going to VCAT. It will get through VCAT because under the planning scheme meets the requirements. What we're trying to do here tonight, as everyone said, I won't repeat it all, is to actually trying to address through the management plan some of your concerns. I also would recommend that if the parking is such a concern that you might want to start that process through council to get permitted parking so that it limits, you don't want that, well, that's the challenge if you, that's the challenge that for the street that is an option to you. And for the lady that has that area that's no standing, perhaps where it's difficult to get into your property, perhaps contact council and get an assessment of whether that's something that could be put in place, those additional things. Look, it's also hard for council, though, if people are parking illegally, for them to manage them doing the right thing. I mean, we can have all the no standing signs in the world, but if people keep doing the wrong thing. So, look, I hope that some of these conditions go some way to alleviating your concerns. I'm not pretending that it's going to make you fully happy, but it is the fact that it's triggered a permit is the best opportunity to address some of these issues.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. As a Canal Ward councillor, I've heard from many of the residents about their objections to this application, and I attended the consultation. The street is 130 metres in length, which is very small, and for those that have visited it, it's a cul-de-sac. It takes a very large family home of 5 bedrooms and turns it into a house of 11 bedrooms, which is going to be allowed to sleep 13 people. In a small street, to allow this level of intensification of density within that street in a small community neighbourhood is not really in keeping with the amenity of our municipality that we would all like. I think if we're all honest, none of us who own a home would probably be wanting this in our street. Parking has been raised multiple times, as we've heard tonight, and given the car spaces are in tandem, it probably, and I acknowledge that it meets the planning requirements, but it's probably not in the spirit of what is intended when we talk about 2 car spaces, because they possibly can't be used independently of each other. And it certainly doesn't cover 2 car spaces, doesn't cover for 13 people potentially living in a house or with a car that no one can say they won't have a car. Ronald spoke tonight about the requirement to bring in street parking, which has been raised, restrictions, and to alleviate potential parking problems that this application may bring. But then that is another negative potentially to the residents that they don't have to deal with at this point in time. I appreciate the lengths that the applicants have gone to. I think it has been, I've seen more than others have probably been prepared to do. To appease the residents, and we've added in clauses around ensuring that the rooming house residents are students, that they won't have cars, but I'm not really sure how this is enforceable. How can anyone really say who's studying, who's finished studying, or what they may or may not be doing? How can we say how many guests and visitors the residents may have? I appreciate the management plan allows for a hotline for residents and other items when it's in the middle of the night, and there might be issues. Who's actually going to be there to help the residents deal with this? I'm not sure. I don't believe that people are making judgments on the potential rooming house residents. It's just that nobody can know in a rooming house environment who's going to live there. And we know from the consultation process that the applicants won't be living there in the future. And how would we feel if this was the street we lived in, I guess is how I view this. While there is a bus route that's close for residents and the management plan has signs putting up where those are, the walk to Balaclava station is 23 minutes. And it doesn't seem to me to be the ideal location from a public transport accessibility in terms of other potential locations where you might say, okay, a rooming house is very close to public transport and that might make more sense in my view. I appreciate that council officers have looked at the planning regulations and it meets those things. Possibly, the regulations provided by the state government seem to perhaps don't consider the other avenues, provide other avenues for residents and recourse other than VCAT. Essentially, this is bringing a commercial business into a residential environment and a small street, which can change the amenity of the neighbourhood. I think that's fairly clear. We as councillors tonight, we have a choice to support the residents' concern, and whether the residents may or may not be successful at VCAT is not really our choice to make or avoid, given that this is not supported by the overwhelming number of people who live in that neighbourhood. If Councillor Bond's motion does not get voted up tonight, I foreshadow an alternative motion to refuse. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Did you want to speak? No? All right, I'm just going to add a little bit. I'm so pleased to hear that this has brought the community together. You all have been, you're very alert of this project and will be hyper aware of what's going on. And I think that the process has allowed the applicant to hear your views. So I echo a lot of the other views tonight that putting in these extra conditions is probably the best offer, rather than going straight to a refusal, even though I sympathise with your views. That's probably the best way to approach on this planning matter. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Councillor Sirikoff, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you, Mayor. I will say something. I'd just like to reiterate some of the concerns that Councillor Clark has already made, and that is we're here to listen to the residents and the impacts that are upon that they have to endure all the time, day in, day out. With when you've got a building of this size with 13, which allows for 13 occupants, this is going to be an intensification of the street with such an occupancy, and we have no guarantee that now or into the future that the place will be accommodating just students. We trust that the applicant will do so and adhere to those rules, but there's no way of really enforcing those rules unless you've got somebody there to check that who's going in and out of the place. As already raised, when we've got an application where it only requires 2 car spaces, especially when it's 2 tandem car spaces in a garage, it's not really meeting the requirements, because theoretically there's only going to be 1 car in that garage, because you can't wait for another stranger who's living in the same building to be around to move that car in and out when you want to move in and out. And then if you do have 13 occupants, who's going to do the checking on the street? Who's going to be enforcing that any of the occupants of this building don't have cars in the street? So it raises another number of issues, as Councillor Clark pointed out, that how is this enforceable unless somebody in the street is taking number plates and seeing where those people are going to and from. So on those sort of issues and what's enforceable, while I commend Councillor Bond trying to find solutions for the community with these amendments to the management of the property, I have my doubts about how enforceable this is, so I'm not in support of it.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Otherwise, Councillor Bond, would you like to close? All right. I now put the motion. All those in favour of this one? All those against? The motion is carried. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 10.2. I'll wait for those who might want to leave. Thank you for coming tonight. Yep. Hey, Donna, could you come up here real quick, please? Thank you. We're going to go on to item 10.2. Is that bolted to the ground? Changes to planning delegations, 9 December 2022. So from tomorrow until the first sitting of the planning committee in the new year. Councillors, do we have any questions of the officers on this item? All right. Councillor Pearl said he'll move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford, thank you. Councillor Pearl, do you want to speak to it? Thank you. Councillor Crawford, do you want to speak to it? No? All right. Well, I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, on to 10.3, statutory planning delegated decisions, November 2020. Any questions of the officers? No? Anybody want to move this? Thank you, Councillor Crawford. A seconder? Councillor Martin? Do either of you want to speak to it? No? All right, I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now on to item 10.4, South Melbourne Structure Plan. Councillors, do we have any questions of the officers on this item? Councillor Crawford?
Just want to clarify, we're really just taking submissions and hearing the results of that, and things like that were mentioned, like height differences in order to increase. That's a few steps down the track that we would actually consider that.
Through you, Mayor, you are correct in terms of Councillor Crawford. This is in terms of acknowledging both the results of the second phase of community engagement, but also endorse the proposed guidelines and character statements to go out for targeted consultation early next year, which will then return to Council and then proceed out to broader community engagement on a draft structure plan pending a future Council decision.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'm looking for a mover from this item. Councillor Martin, do you have a seconder? Councillor Bond? Thank you. Councillor Martin, do you want to speak to it?
Very briefly, can I firstly acknowledge the work of all of our council officers in the initial stages of developing the South Melbourne Structure Plan, the consultations that we've run, and we know this is really one of those ticks the boxes to say we've reached this stage, but there is now going to be a whole lot more interactions with our community as we take things further. As ward councillors, we've met with a number of people who've made representations to us, and I know there are a couple of the speakers tonight who'd met with us with some of the concerns or interests that they had in this development of the South Melbourne Structure Plan, and we ward councillors actually invited a couple of them to come in and speak tonight so that people are aware of some of the things that members of our committee will be raising over the next few months as we further develop this, just so that people have a heads up and they don't get surprises. Having said that, who knows where the consultation will end up and what we'll do, but it's the fact that we've got such an interest out there, I think, is quite excellent. The South Melbourne community is well aware of what's going on, and I look forward to a very productive next 12 months.
Thank you. Councillor Bond, do you want to speak to it? Anybody else want to speak to this item? All right, moving through. I'll put that one, the motion to a vote. All those in favour? Thank you. That's carried. Okay, now we're on to 10.5, the e-scooter trial. Councillors, are there any questions of the officers on this item? Councillor Clark?
Yes, could I seek clarification from the officers on how they are recording or obtaining the information in relation to breaches of safety by people using the scooters, for example, 2 people on the scooter, no helmet, some of those things. How do we actually know and record the number of those incidents? What information are we relying on to know actually how the safety is being implemented or abided by? Perhaps is a better way.
Through you, Mayor. It's fair to say in the first instance, residents are encouraged to contact the operators who are best placed, I suppose, to respond to a variety of incidents. In terms of those that are noted and reported, they are followed up by the operators. but I do know that we have received, over the last 9 months of the trial, we've received 84 customer requests that have come directly to us that we then pass on to the operators as well for a variety of reasons. But also note that the operators are also seeking to monitor that and also encouraging through a variety of different means, legal as well as safe behaviour by the users themselves as well.
Thank you. Another question? Did you?
I just have a follow-up. Sorry, Councillor. And do you have any knowledge of how many fines have been issued by the police in the city of Port Phillip?
Through you, Mayor, I don't have the numbers. I'm not aware necessarily of the number of fines that have been issued by the police, as that information is not necessarily readily conveyed to us from VicPol.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Sirikoff.
Thank you, Mayor. I was also wondering if Council has any powers through their local laws. I don't mean powers, but do local laws have any way of, if they see these e-scooters on, say, the high streets, Ackland Street or Fitzroy Street, to take any action to report those e-scooters to the companies who rent them out, so that making sure that our residents are safe on the high streets?
Through your Mayor, council officers from a variety of operational areas meet regularly with the operators to provide feedback and review the performance, as well as to identify issues and areas for improvement. On kind of a more operational basis as well, where requests are made or noted that there are issues with e-scooters that need to be relocated, there is an established mechanism for officers to communicate that directly to the operators for actioning and relocation.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I'm looking for a mover of this item. Councillor Martin, thank you. A seconder? Councillor Bond, thank you. Councillor Martin, would you like to speak to it?
My anecdotal observations are that we've got far more people active in the city of Port Phillip and who are now using the mobile scooters. We only have to look at the number of people who are using them in transit. There are people, as old as me, who are out there using them, which I think is fantastic. I also note that there don't seem to be as many transgressions now as there were early on. There are still people misusing them, but most of the behaviour that I see that's poor is those far more powerful and illegal personal scooters rather than the green and orange scooters that we see. And there is going to be a full evaluation at the end of the trial. If we, as a council, pull ourselves out of this trial while the other local municipalities are still involved, along with the City of Melbourne, it's going to cause a major gap to the trial. So because I don't see any major counter-indications to saying why we should at this stage abandon our part of the trial, I think we should let it continue until there's a full evaluation of the whole program, and then we can decide, along with the other local councils, whether we wish to continue. But I urge that we continue our involvement until such time as we have the formal evaluation of the whole program.
Thank you. Councillor Bond.
I think the scooter trial's been very interesting, to say the least. You do see lots of people riding scooters, and it's often hard to tell whether they're using them as genuine commuter traffic or sometimes probably using them as toys. But there certainly seems to be a combination of both. I think, as Councillor Martin said, you're probably seeing less of the use of scooters as toys as the novelty wears off, and the genuine use of them as a commuter vehicle to get from A to B is probably more prevalent now. But I look forward to some information at the end of this trial to tell us exactly what is occurring here and how many people are using them as genuine commuters and how many people are, I won't say misuse, but using them as toys later at night, maybe after leaving a bar, when perhaps they shouldn't be on a scooter. But that will all come out in the trial, I guess.
Thank you. Any other councillors want to speak to the item? Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'm supportive of this recommendation on the basis that it allows council to sit at the table with the state government and be part of the evaluation and have a say in what the safety evaluation and potential road rules or changes or whatever may or may not need to be made. I have genuine concerns about how the scooters are being ridden. I think it's fair to say that it's almost impossible to get accurate information on the safety around them, because within 2 minutes of driving down a street, I can see 2 scooters, both being, it happened the other day, both being ridden in unsafe manner, and I'm not ringing up and reporting that, and I would guess that the majority of residents aren't. You literally could sit on any main street where they are ridden and see examples of unsafe behaviour every day, every half an hour or less, I would imagine. To some extent, that's a rider's choice. I guess it depends if we want to see compliance or we're happy to take the risks around that ultimately, as will be part of our decision making out when this trial is fully evaluated. So, as I said, I also question whether the police really have the resources to be able to adequately manage the safety and the impacts of them. But once again, that'll form part of the police's evaluation and the whole program. So, yeah, I am supportive with some concerns around it, and we'll see what comes back to council once the program's fully evaluated. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin, do you want to close? Nope. All right. Any other? Yep. Okay. I'll now put the motion to a vote. All in favour? That's carried. Carried. Did you vote? That's right. All right. Thanks. All right. We're going to move on to notice of motion. Councillors, we have one notice of motion tonight. Item 14.1 is a motion raised by Councillor Sirikoff in relation to the pop-up bike lanes. Do councillors have any questions of Councillor Sirikoff in regard to this proposed notice of motion? And I note that officers are available if required. All right, Councillor Martin, go ahead.
Can I seek some clarification either from Councillor Sirikoff or from council officers? In point 5, when we get to the line 3, we're talking about removal of the pop-up bike lane locations, blah, 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 blah. I shouldn't say that, should I? At those locations, what locations is this referring to? Is this referring to the locations that are specifically listed here, Marine Parade, Westbury Street, Brighton, Dickens Street, or is it more general than that? And given that I think it's ambiguous, can we clarify this so it's very clear whether it's referring just to the specific places here or whether it's referring to other locations in the city of Port Phillip?
I thank you, Councillor Martin. It's referring to the locations that are in the report. And then I'm going to make an amendment to the motion, but in the original motion I was wanting to address the 6 of the 7 locations that are mentioned in the report. They're the ones that I'm referring to for removal.
So, would you be happy to put that in just so it's very, very specific so we know exactly what we're dealing with?
Yes. Can you sort of explain a little bit more what you're...
So,
this has been clarified in the amendment.
Yeah, it's going to be clarified in the amendment.
And then secondly, there are a series of dot points after dot point 2 that council continued, and it seems to me that there's a sentence missing there. So
that's how it appears on the screen.
Oh, okay.
Or will appear on the screen once.
All right.
Yeah. So we're going to
once I've seen these, I'll be in better place to be able to judge what I think of the whole motion.
Any other questions? No. All right. Councillor Sirikoff, would you like to move this notice of motion or another version?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor, I am moving a slightly amended version of item 14.1, which has been circulated among all of the councillors present.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for the... Do we need to read it out? What do we need to do? Yeah, I'm going to have you read it out. It is on the screen. Oh, it's on the screen. Can we just cycle through it so that the people in the gallery who haven't seen it in the papers...
Am I the seconder? Sorry, Mayor.
Just wait and then we'll second it. Make sure that that's what's being said.
Okay, so it's flipped. If you can flip it back down, yep. So basically in point 2, I'm going to remove the safety concerns raised in the traffic group report equally apply to road treatments not included in the report, and council requests that removal of infrastructure is consistently applied across the whole community. I'm going to remove that. And I'm just moving around a few things. I'm separating the Westbury Street removal into point 3, writes to the Department of Transport and requests that they immediately end the pop-up bike trails on Westbury Street, St Kilda East, and remove the concrete barriers northbound on Marine Parade. And then in point 5, writes to the department, and it continues on in the same way. Going down to the first point, Marine Parade curb separated bicycle. Specifically, council requests DOT to remove the following treatments. Dot 1, Marine Parade curb separated bicycle lanes in consultation with council. And then going further down to remove Westbury Street, St Kilda East, because that's been put in the point 3 above, and so the other points are then renumbered.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for this?
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. All right, Councillor Sirkoff, you can speak to your motion.
Thank you, Mayor. In July of this year, we had a full gallery of more than 100 residents in this town hall, and they were concerned about the 38 kilometres of bike lane treatments which they considered were unsafe and dangerous for cyclists and motorists, and they wanted all of those bike lanes to be removed. The message was repeated to us over and over again that the bike lanes only created conflict and hazards for cyclists and motorists. As we are aware, our city has been traversed with pop-up bike lanes, which include bright yellow lines protruding out into road intersections and infilled with large concrete blocks and bollards, a bicycle lane crisscrossing through a roundabout, narrowing of wide roads, forcing bikes to merge with motorists, and bike lanes squeezed down the centre of a road already filled with trees. Some of these unsafe pop-up bike lanes were removed by the Department of Transport following the July Council meeting because we listened to the residents. I would also like to thank the Department of Transport for listening and reinstating those roads initially identified for removal. However, the residents did not stop there. Our residents, and I repeat, our residents, felt it extremely urgent to address the safety of the remaining pop-up bike lanes, so much so that these residents, who are cyclists, took it upon themselves to commission an independent report on the impacts of these pop-up bike lanes, since the Department of Transport unfortunately was not forthcoming with a safety audit report to justify the pop-up bike lanes, which has also been requested by some of the councillors. This motion is not about stopping cyclists on our roads. We want to encourage that. It is about identifying and removing any unsafe and dangerous bike lanes for cyclists, motorists and pedestrians alike. The installation of concrete blocks and bollards have created a problem when there was no problem to start off with. And we heard some of the speakers tonight saying those very same words. I hope that all councillors had an opportunity to read the traffic group report. Tonight, prior to this amendment, I still am, I'm addressing 6 of the 7 locations in this report, which are a part of the remaining 34 kilometres of the pop-up bike lanes. The traffic group report has been prepared by an independent group of consultants on bike lane design and who also consult to the City of Port Phillip and the Department of Transport. The report reveals in a concise and systematic manner the adverse impacts of the pop-up bike lanes, and that the 6 locations in this report are representative, as they state, as they are representative of the 34 kilometres of pop-up bike lanes which are recommended for removal. The report details how the protruding lines at road intersections, the the concrete blocks and bollards have resulted in 1, the unnecessary narrowing of wide roads, 2, the unnecessary merging of cyclists and motorists, and the installations creating obstacles for cyclists to contend with. These installations give rise to confusion for motorists and confusion for cyclists, such as cyclists not observing the current road rule 141, whereby a bike rider is not permitted to ride past to the left of a vehicle intending to turn left. Unfortunately, this has been happening on Marine Parade between Cavell Street and Shakespeare Grove. In addition, we now have motorists who unknowingly are illegally driving up the bike lanes to turn left. This has created total confusion. There is also the unnecessary narrowing of minor roads, so that when making a near 90-degree left turn, the report questions the capacity of a large vehicle, such as a garbage truck, to safely turn without crossing the path of oncoming traffic. The road treatments also exacerbate traffic congestion by narrowing roadways at intersections and forcing unnecessary merging of traffic. This is creating a higher risk of collisions between passing vehicles or between motorists and cyclists. An example is given in the report at the intersection of Deacon Street with Lock and York Streets in St Kilda West, where Deacon Street has been narrowed down from 18 metres to 7.2 metres. That's a dramatic change in the space that you can travel on a road. Prior to the bike lane treatments, the roads were wide enough to accommodate both cyclists and motorists without any incidences. Another example of traffic congestion, which some councillors have witnessed, is when cars have been forced to creep out into the traffic so that banked-up traffic cannot get around, so that banked-up traffic behind them can get around them and then turn left. This motion does list a number of representative examples of the pop-up bike lane installations from the report which need to be removed, plus a few more bike lanes which residents also want removed because of the many near and actual collisions which have already occurred between motorists and cyclists, namely on Westbury Street. And we had a number of residents speaking to that tonight, what they've incurred and seen and reported. We have received also along with that their images and videos of what's happening in action, and this has become a disaster on Westbury Street. Also listed to reinstate is the intersection at Brighton Road and Dickens Street, which exhibits unnecessary bollards, concrete blocks, to only create an unsafe 90-degree left-hand turn, and which is inconsistent with the neighbouring Milton Street and Hennessy Avenue. Also, I would like to share with the community, as it's already mentioned tonight, that Josh Burns, a federal parliamentary member of Macnamara, and Nina Taylor, who has a 99% surety, will be the new member for Albert Park. Both support the removal of the remaining 34 kilometres of these pop-up bike lanes. I hope that all councillors will again listen to our residents and respect the efforts that they have gone to commission the traffic report to inform us councillors of some of the adverse impacts that are happening right now. And I also ask councillors to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sirikoff. Councillor Clark, you seconded it, yes? You may speak.
Thank you, Mayor. In my 2 years on council, I think it's rare that I've seen such outrage from our community about a single issue and the lack of consultation from their perspective around the changes that were being made. I've heard it from both councillors and the community about the lack of consultation for the changes. I voted against these pop-up bike lanes and now we see we're spending hours trying to clean up the end result of the changes that have been made. Such as this dislike of these pop-up bike lanes and the concern for safety and increased confusion that local residents off their own back engaged a reputable traffic management company who does work for some government departments. You have to ask yourself, how often does that sort of thing happen? Rarely. Aside from the diminishing amenity of our municipality, it's created a whole range of unsafe driving behaviours, which many of us have commented on and witnessed, and particularly in Westbury Street, it appears to have contributed to accidents or at the very least caused confusion, which has potentially caused accidents. Westbury Street is a disastrous outcome for the residents, cyclists, and everyone else who uses that street. It's quite amazingly united both cyclists and residents who are generally concerned for the safety of cyclists and others in being against this design. They themselves have called for the street to be returned to the previous design, which I fully support and should be immediate. Marine Parade is unsafe when you're trying to turn left at 60 kilometres as you're heading out southbound, turning left into the streets. Due to the concrete bollards that have now been placed. When you try to turn left, you have to now almost certainly turn into the oncoming lane as well as the left lane that you're trying to get into. An issue turning, if you look at Dickens Street, onto Brighton Parade and all of the other streets along that area that turn into Brighton Road, due to the concrete bollards. It's very difficult, almost impossible now to merge safely into the left lane. Because of the concrete bollards, you have to almost merge into forced across two lanes, which makes it more unsafe and difficult. The impact to both cars and cyclists needs to be balanced up in terms of changes we make around bike lanes, and I don't see the balance that we need in terms of these bike lanes or pop-up bike lanes. I quote from Josh Burns sent councillors and mayor a letter on the 6th of December. And he says, my office has received a large amount of correspondence from community members highlighting serious safety concerns and massive inconveniences that are the pop-up bike lanes. And for those who don't know, Josh Burns is a federal member for McNamara. Throughout November, my team and I met with a range of locals to hear their concerns. It's clear that these are genuine worries about public safety from people who love and want to see our community thriving. Public safety matters, and I know my state counterpart Nina Taylor has been advocating for the removal of these pop-up bike lanes behind the scenes with a great level of urgency, which is what this motion is attempting to address, a sense of urgency that we've not quite seen yet. Josh goes on to say, I fully support Nina Taylor in this endeavour and will continue to advocate for the removal of these pop-up bike lanes. For myself, I find myself in strange agreement with Josh Burns, and I'm fully supportive of this motion as it adds clarity around the streets and the issues we need immediate action on from the Department of Transport. It responds directly to our community's concerns and our concerns as councillors for the safety of our community. There is still a review underway by the Department of Transport, and they do have some actions to come back to us with around some areas. But beyond this motion, there is still much work to be done to return our streets to the previous state before this problematic pop-up bike trail commenced, and I will be supporting this motion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to speak to the item? Councillor Martin.
Firstly, do we have the traffic's authors here still? Because, no, not there. I actually enjoyed their report, and there are some significant recommendations, and I actually agree with a number of the recommendations in the traffic's report. And I'd just like to go through them specifically. They talk about Marine Parade, and the traffic's report identifies increasing safety risks arising from the new infrastructure, and it's true. If you've ever seen the people who ride there in groups there on a Saturday and Sunday, it's bloody dangerous. If you've seen people trying to sneak their cars up the bike lanes to do left turns, it's dangerous, and I think the traffic's report has nailed it right on the head that the Marine Parade infrastructure probably, if it doesn't go, it needs major modifications. It cannot stay the way it is. There are a number of other areas that they talk about in the traffic's report. So I noticed they talk about the Deacon Street, Lock Street, York Street. It's sort of not exactly an intersection, sort of a zigzag intersection. Councillor Sirikos referred to that. And the traffic's report has clearly identified safety risks arising from that infrastructure there. We probably need to take their advice and ask the Department of Transport to remove it. They talk about the intersections of Wordsworth Street, Thackeray Street, Meredith Street on Marine Parade. And traffic's report here says if this treatment is to remain, it needs to be made permanent by adding curb out stands and associated landscaping such that it provides a better urban design outcome. So they're being very even-handed. The report's actually saying, well, if it's going to stay, it needs to be made safer. Maybe it needs to go. Talks about McGregor Street, Park Road and Page Street, and the traffic report states that the presence of the concrete blocks and bollards introduces an additional hazard for cyclists that they'll need to avoid. They're probably right, it probably needs to go. What I like about the traffic support is that it's actually quite even-handed. So there are some intersections here where they're talking about it's not unsafe, but it's mildly unsightly, or the jury's out. There are others that they say really need to go. So I'm in a quandary as to whether I'm going to support this or propose an alt-rec if this doesn't get up, because I still want to listen to the rest of the debate and see where we stand on all this. I note the traffic report doesn't talk about Westbury Street, but I don't think there's anyone in this room at the moment who would, well, I may be wrong, but most of us at least are convinced that Westbury Street needs to be returned to its original form. Things need to be done ASAP. My only concern in the way the motion is currently written is there are a couple of recommendations in the traffic report that are relatively even-handed and don't call for the immediate removal, but they call for perhaps some modifications. And someone said, one of the speakers said earlier, there's no rhyme nor reason for the pop-up bike program. Well, I have to say that the Department of Transport may not have got it all right, but the rationale was to try and encourage people to ride their bikes safely across Port Phillip and provide increased signage that would give people an idea of those safer routes. And they haven't got it all right, and some of it needs to go. And a lot of what Councillor Sirikoff's got in this motion nails a lot of that. So thank you, Councillor Sirikoff, for bringing it on. I'm trying to work out whether it goes too far or whether it's, you know, whether there are a couple of things that Councillor Sirikoff's got in her motion that perhaps would be better left for the remaining 8 months because the traffic report hasn't identified them as being unsafe, or suggests some minor trims would make them safe. On the other hand, there are a number of things in Councillor Sirikoff's motion that I have to agree with. I think they need to go. So I'm going to sit back and see how we go here. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to vote on this, but I do have an alternative motion that is perhaps a little gentler on a couple of the traffic treatments, but picks up on most of what Councillor Sirikoff's got in her motion. And if this motion fails, I'll move the alt-rec.
Are you foreshadowing? Yes, thank you. Anybody else like to speak to the item? Oh, Councillor Bond.
I won't speak for too long because I think others have spoken to the specifics of the motion. Just to generally continue the theme that unfortunately this pop-up bike lane has caused a number of conditions that have made our streets unsafe for cyclists, for pedestrians, for cars. You know, we've all witnessed some very dangerous behaviour, and yes, you can sit there and blame car drivers, they shouldn't be doing this or shouldn't be doing that, but the fact is they weren't doing that before these all this infrastructure was placed on our streets. And you know, Councillor Martin and I were down on Marine Parade and we watched a car trying to turn left, and they genuinely got confused and they genuinely used the cycle lane for about 30 metres so that they could turn left at the next intersection. That sort of behaviour is just being caused by the general confusion of this infrastructure on our streets. I'm sort of hoping or hopeful that this motion becomes a moot point once Nina Taylor, MP for Albert Park, acts on her election promise to the community to remove the DOT pop-up bike lanes throughout Port Phillip, so we don't need to continue going through this process of review and remove, and she just gives the Department of Transport their permission, instruction, whatever you want to call it, to remove the remaining elements from our street. But in the meantime, we'll keep dealing with those that are most dangerous, starting with obviously Westbury Street, which I think there'll be great relief from the residents there once that is removed. And Marine Parade, obviously, there's a lot of cyclists have spoken about the dangers that are occurring down there with these blocks in the middle of roads, especially the dangers to large pelotons, large groups of cyclists who we should be encouraging to get out there and be active on our streets, not creating environments by which their cycling becomes a bit more dangerous and unsafe. So I'll certainly be supporting this alternate motion and thank Councillor Sirikoff for bringing it to our attention.
Next, anyone want to speak? Councillor Crawford, thank you.
I do think as councillors we have to be careful about saying we're speaking for all residents. I think at no time do we speak for everyone in our municipality. And I know that sometimes there's louder voices, but we also have to listen to what people we don't hear and the communities we haven't heard from. And it's part of our legislative requirement that we actually make decisions on behalf of all the community. So I think that needs to be said because we definitely are listening and there are concerns and obviously parts of the trial that are dangerous or, perhaps weren't the best put in. But for a long time we haven't been listening to our cyclist community saying that they want separated bike lanes. So that's kind of why we're at this pop-up point. And I think what this has highlighted is that actually we need to put in on strategic streets, maybe not the residential ones, but actually separated bike lanes because that's the best way to keep people safe. And we don't really have many in this municipality. So I guess that's the point that I come back to. Yes, we can address some of these concerns in this motion and the amended motion is much better than the original. But I think it comes to that bigger picture that actually we're required to keep all of our residents safe. And it's really great to hear Councillors Clark and Sirikoff talk about the safety of concern for safety of their cyclists, and we want cyclists on the road, and we need that balance between cars and cyclists. So that's a really good thing, because sometimes that's challenging, though, to actually make those bold decisions and remove a few car spaces and make those big long-term decisions that we know are going to keep cyclists safe. So I'm happy to support this amended motion in order to address some of the concerns and listen to the community. But I think it's also part of that bigger picture that, we mentioned scooters too, that they're not doing the right thing. We actually have issues in this municipality of a lot of traffic. We actually want to reduce congestion. We actually want to address the safety of scooters behaving badly. So we need these separated bike lanes. So I think it actually brings forth the urgency that we need to look to the future and look about where are those strategic roads where we are, including St Kilda Junction, that we provide a safe, separated way for people to get around when they want to get on bikes in this municipality, and do it properly and do it fully. So, that's where we need to go. And it's challenging as councillors to make those big long-term decisions, but future councils have made big decisions before and it's benefited the community. So I think that, yes, this is, let's address these current issues, but then let's look to the bigger picture of actually how do we genuinely keep our cyclists safe and what does that look like in our city? Because I think we're way behind other cities in the world, but also other municipalities, and that's the bigger problem that we have to address. And given that St Kilda Road central bike lanes, or however they're actually going to be constructed, are going in soon, that urgency for people wanting to ride through our municipality to get to the city, to work, to commute, actually will become a greater need. So I think there's a real opportunity. It's always about lessons learned, how we can do better. So we're listening. I think we need to listen to our full community, and cyclists have been telling us for a long time they want better infrastructure in our city and across Melbourne, to tell you the truth. And sometimes we need to also listen to people that we aren't as vocal. And there were people in support of continuing the trial. It's not just all one-way traffic. And so let's maybe sometimes remember we don't speak for everyone. And I know it's easy to exaggerate for all of our, speaking that we do to the community, but we actually need to be more nuanced, and we need to talk about there are some people, but there are also other views, and how do we actually balance and make the best decisions on behalf of all of them?
Thank you. Any more speakers? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. I'm disappointed to see a motion that attempts to call on councillors to make a decision based on a report like this, such as the traffics report, although it both Councillor Sirikoff and Councillor Clark has called it an independent report. The fact is that up until recently, the traffics were not clear about who had actually paid for and commissioned this report. It later came out through local media that it is two members of the far-right group known as ROP that actually...
Point of order.
What's your point of order?
49 3-part E, error of fact. The general... You know, at the start of this meeting, you gave a preamble that we're all to treat each other with respect, and the Councillor Baxter's reference to ROP or anyone else in this room as being from the far right is just offensive because of the implications it's putting on the people involved. I request that you ask Councillor Baxter to withdraw that comment.
Councillor Baxter, I'd like to ask you to withdraw that comment or clarify, perhaps.
I'm sorry, is far right listed as an abusive term or somewhere on some list of inacceptable terms?
I'd raise that it is a triggering phrase because it's used in a trying direction of view. Also, we did speak about whether ROP was involved in this or not earlier tonight. I'm not sure if you were here at that time and it was negated. So would you like to withdraw that?
Okay, should I say right wing? Is that okay?
Maybe move on just from that topic.
Madam Mayor, can I raise a point of order? And I don't have to raise it in the rules. But thousands of Australian soldiers went to fight against far-right elements in many world wars. And Councillor Baxter should know better of the consequences of saying those sorts of things in this chamber and inciting people to do inappropriate things against councillors here. Withdraw it out of common decency. Grow up.
And also, ROP is not a...
Point of order. Point of order. The mayor needs to point of order. You can't just interrupt and all speak on that. So point of order, go back to the mayor,
Thank
please.
you. I'm going to take back control and appreciate the views that have been said, but we'll deal with this one first. Will you withdraw your comment?
I'm happy to use the term right-wing political advocacy group.
I'm going to take... Hold on. Hey, excuse me. Please, everyone. We're going to take a break. We still have a little bit more on this item. No, please. I've made a decision to take a break. It is 9:38. We'll come back at 9:45 if we're ready. All right. Thank you, everyone, for taking that time out. I uphold the point of order. The comment is offensive. I now ask that you focus on the point. If you continue down the line of being offensive, I will reserve my right to remove you from the chamber. I request all councillors respect my role as chair. There will be no further debate on this. So I can let him keep going. Councillor Baxter, if you speak to the item and to the point, respectfully. Sorry.
Can I raise a second point of order, please?
Hold on.
So,
where's the section?
Going 49.3 point A or B, which is acting in a manner contrary to the rules or conduct in contravention of the Councillor Code of Conduct. And I would request that Councillors Pearl and Bond be asked to withdraw their remarks, which I believe were also inflammatory, given that you already asked Councillor Baxter to withdraw his. The ones that commented on Councillor Baxter's personal behaviour.
Can you clarify the comments, please?
Given that I didn't write them down, but I noticed that Councillor Pearl has walked past Councillor Baxter and made comments about his behaviour that probably should have been directed through the Mayor at a point of order rather than delivered at a personal level, and Councillor Bond made similar comments from across the table. I believe that those comments are unnecessary and inappropriate, but I can't recall them exactly. I didn't take note at the time. Perhaps the tape can help us.
So I'd like to make a statement, if I may, Mayor. Sure.
Thank you. I think on this one, I'm going to go back to what I've just said, and I've asked everybody to keep your comments respectful. I think that we have had offensive comments on both sides, and I'd like to move forward. So we can deal with this outside the chamber, but I really need everyone to lift their behaviour and get back to what people are sitting in our audience and listening online who came here to hear. We're talking about the notice of motion at hand on the public bike lanes. So again, stick to it, be respectful, or I reserve my right to remove people from the chamber. Councillor Baxter, you can continue.
Thank you. Look, I'm not entirely sure what I can and can't say now, but look, I think I can say that this traffics report was commissioned by 2 members of ROP. I'm not allowed to say anything.
Point of order.
We've proven that to be incorrect earlier
Okay,
today.
yes. I think you may have been not present during the question time when we clarified that before. If you could, I don't know if you have a written speech or whatever, if you could move forward from who's commissioned the speech to your next points, I'd really like you to be in the chamber and be able to share your views through your vote, and that's what I'm trying to get us to.
Sure. I'm not used to this level of restriction on what I can say in the chamber, and it has not ever been exercised on any other councillor. So allow me to change what I might say. This traffics report, as noted by the Port Phillip Bicycle Users Group, is a partisan report. It's not an independent report. The Bicycle Users Group, by the way, it was interesting to hear the ROP councillors talk about how even bicycle users, hate this treatment. Well, the actual Bicycle Users Group, which is not a political advocacy group, but in fact just largely a social group that allows for rides for cyclists throughout the city, has noted that the commissioning of the report lacks transparency and accountability. The report does not clearly state its funding sources, aims, methods, limitations and assumptions. The traffics report does not meet basic criteria for independent expert reports, such as the requirements listed in the VCAT practice note for expert evidence. It reviews only a small number of isolated sites within the 38-kilometre pop-up trial, and so can hardly be considered a comprehensive assessment. This is the view of actual cyclists, largely recreational cyclists within the area. They have pushed that the trial should continue, but at the same time they have made a similar point to what Councillor Crawford has made, which was that these pop-up bike lanes, this is a trial. It's good to gather data from the trial and see whether that can inform future safe cycling infrastructure. But actually what we really need is permanent safe cycling infrastructure. So, this should hopefully lead to that. This should actually be about gathering data and seeing how things work. No trial is perfect. Why would you trial something if you actually know everything's going to go swimmingly? So modifications may have to be made and changes and so on, but all we've seen from certain councillors and certain members of the community is a clear drive to simply remove all of this and a very unprofessional report has been commissioned to say the same thing. I've heard some councillors talk about bad behaviour by drivers being a reason why we should remove infrastructure. I can tell you right now, I've been driving for a very, very long time. When I see a speed bump, I slow down and then drive over the speed bump. I don't swerve out into another lane to avoid it. That is completely unacceptable driver behaviour. It is not something that we have to go, oh, geez, the speed bump made them do that really dangerous thing. It's completely unacceptable for a driver to do that. Go over the speed bump and slow the hell down. That is what that should actually be done when drivers see a speed bump. Why is this the fault of safe cycling infrastructure? In the end, I support the continuing of the trial with perhaps some modifications as DOT, the Department of Transport, and as Council identifies things that can work better. But if we just have this political culture war where you've just got people who are dead set on removing any safe cycling infrastructure at all, desperate to just get all of this stuff ripped out, whether it works or doesn't work, that is not conducive to an actual good outcome here. So I cannot support this motion. I have plenty more to say, but I'm sure that I'll be shouted down by those councillors across the way here. So, because that's been their behaviour tonight.
All right. Councillor Pirelli, you have an opportunity to speak because you're one of the only people who haven't spoken, or myself, would you like to speak?
Yes, that would be wonderful. So these bike lanes are a total disaster, and as we've heard tonight, for 3 reasons. And there's some implications of these bike lanes that will be heard for many and felt for many years to come. The first one is that the confidence in bike lane infrastructure has now been lost, and future projects will be delayed, I think, as a loss of trust in our community. And the state government has made a significant error of judgment with the installation of these lanes. The second one was the way the consultation was undertaken with council and council laws was totally inadequate for this project. I don't think any councillors reasonably understood the total amount of the infrastructure and the brutalism of the infrastructure that was installed, and that's been evidenced by the briefing papers that have been reread by many. So the information provided to the councillors wasn't fantastic in terms of being able to make a good quality decision from our point of view, and perhaps also from, I can only speculate, but also through the political elements of the state government also in terms of the members of parliament, etc. And finally, the brutalism to our heritage across our municipality, particularly in Middle Park, but not limited to, has in some good ways made people realise just how precious the streetscape and surrounding area is as part of our local community and as part of our historic outlook. But the disrespect paid to that will put the bike park infrastructure across our city and the cause for it back several years. And you can already see that start to play out in other bits of infrastructure such as Inkerman Street and other municipalities also, albeit perhaps a small element of that single project. Nina Taylor faces her first test of political credibility to the electorate that she's been elected to, and numerous people have voted for her and her party on the commitment that we get rid of these lanes. And I know we've talked tonight about political culture wars, Councillor Baxter, but I think you're overdoing it because on the information I've heard through the election, it's a unity ticket. I heard the Greens candidate very keen to remove a number of the dangerous elements of these projects and a number of the areas that we've facilitated in this report here this evening. So if anything of the political element of this in the last election, it was heartening to see one debate, pretty much a unity ticket between all 4 candidates, the Liberal candidate, Labor candidate, the Greens candidate and an independent candidate, that they all agreed that most of these lanes should be removed, particularly the areas that are causing amenity issues and public safety issues. So it's the right and proper it's the right and proper thing to get rid of this wasteful pop-up project that really hasn't served our city, our population, bike riders, commuters in cars, particularly all that well. And the right thing for the state government to do would be to end the trial early and remove as much of the infrastructure as they possibly can, and reevaluate what is the appropriate means to do this in the future, particularly improving the level of consultation between council and the Department of Transport and the state government, but also grassroots consultation and perhaps a better role that council can facilitate in the future when we look at these sorts of projects. Councillors, I think this is a good motion here this evening, and I hope it gets up. And I thank Councillor Sirikoff, who's been a vocal advocate for particularly people in Middle Park, Albert Park, and even well outside the boundaries of her ward in Westbury Street. But there aren't too many people that disagree that, particularly Westbury Street needs some attention and should be removed. What we now then face is once the tens of kilometres of infrastructure is potentially removed or altered, we're then left with a scarred landscape on our roads, albeit aesthetically looks a lot better, but it does create I wouldn't say as much of a hazard as some of the infrastructure we see here, but it certainly was explained to me that this was temporary pop-up infrastructure that was easy to remove without much lasting impact. On the areas that we've seen removed, and we can benefit from this experience, that hasn't been the case, and some of the areas are actually quite rough, particularly where the ash belt's probably not as recent and seems to be have a more coarse material or more lumpy material in it. So when you take it up, it actually comes up with some sharp rocked edges, etc. Park Street and other areas where it has been removed is probably okay, but Bridge Street in Port Melbourne is not okay in terms of the spiky elements coming out through the road. So it's something we need to consider. So Councillor Sirikoff, hats off to you for putting this up, and well done for the councillors who have also done their best to represent the public and their local residents. This has been a difficult issue, but when you get almost a unity ticket from all parties and all candidates at a state election, a federal MP and perhaps a majority of councillors here this evening potentially, you'd have to be tone deaf not to act on that sort of factual information, the evidence base that's been provided, and the basic common decency of what we're elected here to do, which is act on our community concerns and do the right thing by the majority of people and in the interests of public safety. So I hope your motion gets up here this evening, Councillor Sirikoff, and I hope it doesn't go on deaf ears within the Department of Transport. And I wish Nina Taylor, MP, all the very best in, I think, convincing Minister Horn, who's the new minister responsible for this, to get some action for our local residents and our citizens. Thank you, everybody. Please support this motion.
Thank you. All right, I'll speak to it. I reserve my right to take views into consideration up until the vote. So you'll notice that the delay tonight is we worked out how to ensure these views could be captured, and that's resulted in the alternative motion. Thank you to Councillor Crawford for raising the e-scooters too in your speech. So not to get ahead of ourselves that these are going to be permanently on our road, but this safe bike infrastructure also allows scooters to get off our footpath. So having this network is something that achieves many objectives. Now, I rode a few of these areas today, and despite being a confident rider on the road, I really haven't been on my bike for the last 6 months. So that's something that was, it's been winter when these went in, and we've had terrible weather. So how we can really assess this, but we still have heard from many cyclists who have been out there, their views on it. I think personally that some aspects are good and some are not adding value, or rather introducing hazardous aspects. Someone who was with us today said, I love it. I love the separated bike lanes on Marine Parade as a commuter, but as a group rider, they're so dangerous. And that's one of the important parts to understand, is that we have a variety of riders that we need to cater for, from commuters to group riders to youth to aged. We have a lot, and it's impossible to meet all their needs, but the goal is to increase safety. But we have to also consider if something has been put in that's creating more of a hazard, we need to react to that. So I hear the bike commuters' pleas to not wipe out the entire trial, and that's probably where deleting the line in item 2 that it's request removal of infrastructure consistently applied across the whole municipality is where I'm moving away from that and targeting more the specific items that were featured in this report. So I want to focus on those ones. I want to thank and recognise that the response that we have to date from DOT from that 7th of September notice of motion. Many items have been reinstated or removed, and the rest are in works or have future conversations to be had. But it's hard to know if, without that notice of motion, what we would actually be seeing today. So we put some items down, there's been some actions. Now it seems that this is the opportunity to see other areas of concern processed in the same way. It's a request to remove them. DOT still has a response. And so some ways it's structured. I recognise that Westbury is called out a lot by the speakers tonight over emails, and so that's been moved up to asking for it more immediately. And with that, also another comment tonight about the northbound Marine Parade. Those individual concrete barriers and bollards are items that could be quickly done. What I want to see, the part that I can't fully support, is on Marine Parade, just completely removal, because there's a lot of aspects that are working and there's a lot of aspects that aren't. So, but what Councillor Pearl brought up is a very valid one, that some of the road surfaces, when things are removed, are worse. That the surface is so beat up, and on thin road tires, I don't want to rush this and I want to make sure that we keep certain parts of it that are working. So whether it's the lines, the green sections, a more nuanced conversation on that one, because it's quite a large area, has many riders and many types of riders, including the big groups. So immediate action on some of those obvious items on the northbound lane, but a more holistic review with councillors involved in the conversation about how we go forward to it. But the ultimate is to remove the hazardous aspects. Now, some of these are on our minor 40-kilometre-an-hour local roads, so they are heavy touch when light touch has been used than you would have expected. There are many items that I think that, and I do recognise that there are some aspects that have improved for pedestrians. So when you used your measurements of 18 metres to 7 metres or whatever, that is a huge improvement for pedestrians, how far they have to cross. And there are opportunities that we still can consider about depaving these areas and doing the curb out stands. But right now, with the paint and the bollards and the concrete, it seems excessive and not necessary in these back roads. And sometimes people are cutting across them. They're not solid objects. They still have maneuverable parts. But I know it's after 10 o'clock, so let's get down. Can you read my own writing? I'm supportive of bike infrastructure in general, and that's why I'm trying to break this up to not saying it feels like everything's going, even though I think those words have come from political candidates and elected members. But I think that when we talk more individual ones, we're going to have greater success for what is working and what's not working. And this is the next item, lists that have been identified that are right to support to have removed or considered to be removed. So the last minute collaborations, I think, has been, I'd hope, a success to making sure that we can get majority support and see some action on this. So I will be supporting this one tonight. Thank you. All right, Councillor Sirkoff, you have the right to close. Would you like to close?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'd like to thank the councillors who are supporting this motion, and I'd also like to acknowledge Councillor Crawford in when she said that it is challenging to get it right, and the way it has been delivered, unfortunately, hasn't been right. And by going back to the start, we can try to get it right. And we didn't get it right, and that was reflected by the fact that we had two cyclists two residents, two cyclists who just felt they were compelled to have this report commissioned to look at what are the rights and wrongs that have happened. And so this is why we've ended up with this report, because unfortunately the Department of Transport hasn't been forthcoming in disclosing why they found this safety audit report. They found that their safety audit report was okay for everyone to be out there riding these bike lanes, when we've got cyclists who are actually experiencing it and riding those roads and saying they're not right. And so that's why we've come to this point, that we've got really concerned residents who want to get it right, because they are cyclists and serious about their bike riding, and they're concerned also about all the other cyclists out there on the roads as well. And as in the forums that we had, whether it was a transport forum that we had quite a few months ago, or the recent candidate forum, a number of the candidates did say that, the right place for these bicycle lanes are on the major roads and not on the minor back roads. All four candidates said that, and the Transport Forum candidate said that, and not transport candidate for anyway, both those forums, they said that major roads were the appropriate places and not the small roads. So given that we are finding a situation on these roads where they can be confusing, and in quite a majority of the cases they're unnecessary changes, creating a problem when there was not a problem. I'm hoping that councillors will go ahead and still support this motion, because I'm, like the rest of you, concerned and want to see the safety of everybody on the roads, cyclists, motorists and pedestrians. And we should move forward by getting this right next time round when DOT comes to consult with us. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? Thank you, that's carried.
Can I get a division, please?
Yes, Councillor Bond's called for a division. All those in favour? Bond, Sirikoff, Pearl, Consolo, Martin, Crawford and Clark. All those against? Baxter. Thank you. All right, thank you to those in the gallery and to our officers for such a late night. We really appreciate your attendance. You're welcome to leave if you'd like. We have one more item, but thank you for coming. All right. Well, kind of two items, but I don't expect many speeches tonight so late. Reports by councillor delegates. You do have a right to speak. It's a last meeting. Anyone? All right. On to urgent item of business. The CEO has requested to raise an item of urgent business, being item 16.1, management of legal services. I need a mover and a seconder for council to accept the item as urgent business. Councillor Crawford and second Councillor Martin. I now put the motion. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Councillors, we'll go on to 16.1 now, the urgent item, management of legal services. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I see none. Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Councillor Sirikoff to move. Any seconder? Councillor Crawford, thank you. Councillor Sirikoff, would you like to speak to the motion? No. Councillor Crawford? Anyone else? No? All right, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Thank you. All right, confidential matters. Sorry, there's more items. Councillors, we have no confidential reports listed on the agenda. There being no further business, I declare the meeting closed.